Warning. DisAllusioned Podcast covers distressing themes such as coercive control, domestic violence, sexual assault, suicide, abuse, and human trafficking. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, everyone, and welcome to DisAllusioned Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Sherwood. Today we have a very special guest, Scott Homan, filmmaker. How's it going?
Good, yeah.
He made this actually really good film covering some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and their journey. What inspired you even to start this?
Okay, so the music, or the film covers the music scene inside of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was sort of like one foot in that door throughout my youth. My dad joined that, my grandparents joined it when I was young, so I kind of watched them indoctrinate and then attempt to indoctrinate us while not being like well trained in that. But my mom had a like interest in the arts. My dad's pretty eccentric, kind of builder, engineer type person. So we always had access to like creativity and outlets. And one of the ones that I got interested in the 90s was indie rock and alternative music and guitar playing. So I had this outlet that was not with the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was me and my brother and our friends in high school. And then I met through that many artists in the faith. So my access was because of that weird background. But I really, I've watched every movie that Jehovah's Witnesses ever made about their own faith. And I watched every movie I could find in the 90s when I was a teenager about the Jehovah's Witnesses from the outside perspective or from people who'd left. So I was like watching, kind of like trying to take both sides in. And I thought after getting out that like, the power of a movie, like that stuff really influenced me. Like the people down the outside were, I never had a criticism. I was like, yeah, that's exactly how it works. They didn't do anything. They're not sensational. That movie about shunning is exactly it. So I wanted to make a movie about my experience shunning, because when I left the religion, my not very good at being Jehovah's Witness family all of a sudden took shunning really seriously to use it as an emotional abuse tool to get me to go back to the religion or to protect their own worldview from my dangerous thoughts of, that Wikipedia is as value, and that the 3 paragraphs about how evolution works, that was so dangerous to their worldview that they couldn't have me around. So they shunned me.
Yes. That part of the documentary where they are discussing how they started to question things. It's so fascinating. Like, I can't remember his name. He
Ryan
wrote
Sutter.
to the Watch. What was it?
Oh, no, James Zimmerman. Yeah. He wrote to the Watchtower.
Okay, James wrote the Watchtower and like opened that dialogue. Like, what a radical thing to do. Being a Jehovah's Witness.
Back. And what's cool in the movie is like James has the actual letters. Like I have the copies in the movie of exactly what they said. So if you pause the film, you can actually read what the headquarters said about evolution and what they said about the flood dates, what they said about their chronology of time. They're taking it literally from the Bible. So they're kind of like young earth creationists. And they believe that they believe in the science of the earth, weirdly, that it's like 4 billion years old. But they think that humans were poofed here by God 6,000 years ago, which is the young earth creationist side. And then the flood legends having to follow in the timeline, and then the rise of empires and civilization. So like there's a lot of questions that are raised by this really tiny short timeline of history that humans are brand new on the planet. So yeah, he has this whole dialogue with the leadership of the church, or at least the writing department.
Could you imagine being them and receiving that letter? And like the evidence too. He sends them like, look at this, and this doesn't make sense. And then, they respond what Charles Darwin quote.
Yeah. It's in in their books. They quote all these famous authors and famous thinkers, but they misquote them. And that like the film gets into that in a deep way. Yeah.
Yeah, that was insane. I was like, wow, that would shake you. It would. It's so manipulative to, like, no, look at this. Like, we're not sure. Or I think it was eyeballs, how eyeballs evolved.
Oh, yeah.
Or like, if that was even possible. That is
and that gets into the concept of irreducible complexity, which is fascinating. And I got really sucked into that. Like, what is the actual proof for whether or not there was an infinite being who like magically created everything in its in its already complex forms versus like, could it have, followed this natural progression? And so there's like religious people have written books about how irreducible complexity is an issue. So I got sucked into that on my, like, as I was sort of like free thinking and kind of starting to get out. And then it was one of the people in the movie who actually sent me a book. They're like, okay, so you read that book. So you did confirmation bias, where you went and looked for information that confirmed what you already believe.
Yeah.
And you think that happened. Now read this other book that actually proves and makes the point that there is evidence for all of those things. Like, let's say that the eyeball, for example, is like, there's 20 different complex things. Well, do we have an example of an eyeball in the wild at all of those different more primitive stages down to just photosensitive cells with no lens? And the fact is, we do living examples of the eyeball in every single state that it would have taken to get to our eyeball. In fact, our eyeball is not the most advanced eyeball. The octopus has a more advanced eyeball, more complex eyeball.
Wow.
But there's an example of, at every stage. So not doing confirmation bias research, which is not research. That was actually a lesson while I was still a Jehovah's Witness that I was learning from active members of the church who are also starting to do free thinking in the long path out, like the long path of deconstruction.
That is so fascinating. And it's a problem, I think, in general, like in society too, because people do have a tendency to research or focus on the things that maintain whatever their beliefs are or their narrative that they're trying to maintain. And something you see, that's why it is so important to expand outside the box.
Yeah.
And really question yourself. Like, I think that your film did such a good job, like, capturing that process of critical thinking and really questioning your beliefs. Is it Cindy?
Yes.
Okay.
Cindy Elvendahl, rock star.
Yes, especially being a young woman and the way that she talked about, she said she was like 17 and she was starting to question things like, is this really what I'm about? And, delve more into it, more into the religion to really break things down to, confirm, like, is this right? Something that was interesting too, is they had like good things to say, right, about the, different things they were taught. They were taught different skills, like different, I believe he was talking about like being a speaker and things like that. So is that something that's prominent for Jehovah's Witnesses?
Oh, being a speaker, like doing speeches and talks. Yeah, they had a school for like 60 years called the Theocratic Ministry School, where they trained you in public speaking from like 5 years old. You start out with a basic talk, or you can do a demonstration where two people are on stage. Women have that privilege. I shouldn't be using their language, where they get to be on stage in front of the audience, but they're doing basically a poorly written plot skit of them talking to someone at their door or in a Bible study. Men can do that, but mostly men are in front of the audience giving like a 5-minute prepared speech, and then later like a 7 or 10 minute, and then later 15, and then eventually you're like training to be an elder where you're giving like 40-minute talks. And that ended like 7 years ago, but it had a good like half-century run. So everyone's kind of trained in public speaking because that's their big thing. So in a way, it's like I hated it, but I have zero fear of talking to anyone on the planet at any level in society, which I feel is like a pretty big asset, knocking on doors, I think, than standing up in front of an audience.
Oh, yes. Knocking. I totally forgot about that. Yeah. So you have to be good at speaking. Like, it's like a necessity. I think it's really fascinating.
Well, it's also an interesting thing because you're breaking down people's barrier. You're like, it's not so much about us being right or you being right. Like, what are your deep thoughts about the existence of, the supernatural? And you just let people out. That's how I would approach it. Like, I just let people roll and talk about their deep core beliefs. And they're like, my wife's not around. Like, I guess I can say anything I want. It's this like cult member. And they would just like, because you're in this like weird privileged space. It's like sitting on the airplane next to somebody, but with no audience. Like, oh, we'll never see each other again. And this is completely random that we're here. I'm going to dump all my stuff on you and be completely unfiltered. And they can do that with, some guy. So I heard the craziest stories of the supernatural And in a way, it's like a really good lesson in like humanizing all what is humanizing just the experience of being here on the planet alive. Like you had some weird unexplainable thing happened, and that's where your faith is based. What did you think it was? Aliens, angels, demons, God himself, Jesus came down. Like everyone had a different perspective on what the thing was, but it's like levels the playing field when you're not talking about the normal tangible life that we live, or what car you have, or your house, or your mortgage, or whatever.
Did you got that a lot door to door?
That's my experience door to door. Talking about weird orbs, and like the cupboards were slamming on their own and stuff was flying across the room. There was the angels. Like, oh, that was your interpretation. My culture would call that demons. I think you're possessed. It was just my internal dialogue was like, this is fascinating. Why are there light orbs flying through this guy's bedroom all the time? What does that mean?
Did that make you think outside the box when you would have these conversations with people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's such a process, right? People think about being the lived cult experience, like, oh, you were in and then you're out. And for some people, it's a massive rug pull when they leave or get kicked out, that like, oh, they're thrust into a different world with a completely different way of seeing the world. But for me, like I grew up with people in different religions and people that had no religion, people that were openly atheist, people that were like going to church because their parents made them, but they didn't really believe, people that were definite believers, going to like all the church activities, in a church band, that kind of thing, all levels. So I had those different perspectives, and my entire family outside of my immediate family, like that were present in my local town that we hung out with all the time, were in different religions with different worldviews. So like, and that was like my real peers, not the religious people in the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I feel like, there's like so much spectrum, and there's so many influences coming in. And all of it informs that there's different ways of seeing the world, different ways of operating. And it doesn't help to be the person screaming that they're right. I don't have to be right.
Exactly. Because we don't really know all the answers in reality, like
nobody
that's
knows.
Something that, exactly. It's something that even science doesn't know, not at this point anyways. It's in its infancy.
Science has made incredible discoveries. But at the same time, they're like, we don't know what things have mass still. They're still trying to figure it out. Like, there's
the basic.
Like, we just discovered how plate tectonics move continents around the planet. Like, we're babies.
That's always something I go back to when it comes to, people's beliefs or religion. I like to be open to being wrong, because I know I don't know it all, and I know in science we don't know it all. And I do believe, though, that in time that science will eventually probably get, it'll get closer and closer over time. So
well, the mechanism is set up properly. So in religion, if you're like, hey, I think the leader's wrong, I'm right, like, you're gonna get kicked out. And so you're incentivized to agree with the leader and perpetuate ideas, whether they're correct or not. And I mean, we're talking about the supernatural. So, and like ancient holy books written by sheep herders, and like, are they right? Have they been correct for 2,000 years? Should we really be putting so much weight on these things? But in science, it's like, that's your job. Your job is to say, hey, I respect you and all the work that you did. I did some more research, and here is what I found. You're wrong. And they're like, bravo. Give the guy a seat on the, in the department at the leadership table, because he figured out that the last leader was wrong. And they both get to sit on the table because they're both like, actually, the evidence now says that is more correct. Cool. Awesome. What else can we upturn and like reveal to society? And like every nature journal, science journal, all the prestigious ones are like just saying the last person was wrong. That's like every article. And it's celebrated. It's not always good, because like there's egos wrapped up in having been the last person who was correct, and then they got tenured at the university. So like sometimes some people have to die before the new idea comes out, unfortunately. So like there's human behavior barriers to new information coming out.
Oh, absolutely.
But it works better than religion, which says, oh, if you don't agree with the leader, we're going to murder you. Which is what we've had for millions of years or thousands of years.
And
another problem with getting new information out there is we have these journals these that publish different papers, different research, and you have to have it peer reviewed and all those things. And you do have a lot of biases in research, unfortunately. And it is a big, like, very, very well-known problem. So
do you know that from your
journals,
experience or from reading about it? Oh, what is your angle?
So I got my bachelor's in psychology and also philosophy. So I got like double bachelor's. So I was just always working in research. I worked in like a bunch of psychology research labs.
Those psychology and philosophy and the practice, do you think that they are actually scientific? Or do they follow, like you said, laboratory? That sounds scientific. But just like honest, like no judgment. I'm just curious.
Psychology, yes, is absolute. It's the same, scientific method that you're using in your research. I think the obstacles that you deal with in psychology, though, are just biases that are, they're very unconscious and they influence everyone. So it's just kind of one of those things where, there's no common ground in psychology. I feel like it's just all up for debate. It's all theory, but we're all very, everyone's very much well aware of that fact. So it is all theory, but you can do experiments and you can do research and chip away, but you're only taking baby steps. When you do research, you're like, okay, here's a question that someone got like the answer started on in this experiment. Maybe we can expand on that and like tweak the experiment to get a better idea, right? Or to prove or disprove or things like that. Now, philosophy is like the root of all of it, right? It is the original scientists, the original psychologists, the original thinkers in history.
Like the asking the right questions kind of thing.
It is. It's all critical thinking. So philosophy is definitely more about language. You're breaking down people's arguments. But you're not just breaking down their arguments. You're breaking down your own arguments. Like you cannot approach any topic in philosophy with that kind of biasy, because you are going to be up against some of the smartest people you've ever met who are going to think the complete opposite of you. And they're going to have really strong arguments, even if it sounds ridiculous. And you have to question yourself. You have to, like, to bring a strong argument in philosophy, you have to, the person you are debating against, like, you must give them the most charitable, like, you look at their argument in its strengths and not its weaknesses, so it changes your perception of things. It's really exactly what they were doing in your film, to be honest. Like, that is what they were doing, was they were breaking that down, and they were looking at the strengths and the weaknesses, and they were looking at the opposite. They're looking at other arguments.
You're really good at bringing things back to my film, Witness Underground. So if you're still here, witnessunderground.com for all the links to watch.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it stands out to me because, like, for me, when I went to college, that is when I realized I was brainwashed, and it was philosophy that did that for me.
Oh, cool.
Because it took me through those processes.
What's the name of the religion that you were a part of growing up?
So, well, it's complicated. I grew up evangelical.
That's the ultimate cult. Okay. Yeah. You don't even actually know what it is. Evangelical. Okay. More neutral, like fringe American Christian religion.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was even more. It was like my family came from an evangelical cult. So it was like, so
you like raised up you came out of that bubble into the evangelical world.
Well, like I was raised in that world because my parents had left that cult at the time, but they weren't out of it in their beliefs. They still believed it. And
we have a name for this in the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's called physically out, mentally in.
Yep,
So
exactly.
you can have that for decades. Some people never leave that. They die still believing all of it's true, but feeling guilty the whole time because they
Yeah,
just don't go to church anymore, or they lost their community or something, or they're sinning.
r-
Sinning,
right,
just not a real thing.
right. So it was like evangelical, but it was like a spin on evangelicalism from
Okay.
a specific pastor, um, actually back in the 70s. So by the time I was born, they were out of it. But, I was homeschooled. Then I went to fundamental Baptist school and and then you go to public school and then you're like, oh, wow. You get in the real world. And like that pushed on my beliefs in Christianity. Eventually I denounced it, but I ended up joining a doomsday cult
Oh
after
wow.
that.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
You leaned back into something even more extreme than your parents did, or the similar.
Mm-hmm. I
Which one was
did.
that?
Yeah. It's not, there's no name right now. A lot of what I've been doing with my podcast and things was kind of just getting that information out there, the cult that I was from.
Mm.
Because it was like a shaman, right? Like a psychic, it was
Oh wow.
spiritual.
So
It
this
got
is a big
super,
danger. I was talking to Janja Lalich. We just went to the Cult Awareness Conference in New Zealand. So I'm staying for a while here in New Zealand.
oh,
But
nice.
she's like a cult expert, wrote Take Back Your Life, and she came up with the concept of bounded choice, which is really interesting. About like everyone says they made a choice to join a cult, or like they're making a choice to shun their kids, or the kid made a choice, but like these are bounded choices. The concept is
Mhm.
basically like it's high stakes, like these are life and death decisions, but they're not.
Yeah.
But the cult wants you to think that they are.
That's
But she was
exactly what
saying
you think.
how like there's a rise in cults. Like she's been working on this for decades, and
Mm-hmm.
brings up the people like David Koresh and the classic ones, Jim Jones, and like it sounds like ancient history now. And who's going to follow someone who's going to murder you with Kool-Aid or a suicide cult and fly on a comet or whatever, to like that people did in the late 90s with Hale Bob. Can't remember their name. Apple White, the guy. But like those are classic cults that people almost laugh at because they're so ridiculous. Like who would ever be a part of that thing? But so she was talking about how there's like right now we have the most amount of cult-like control dynamics than ever in history because of the power of the internet. You don't even have to go to the ashram. You don't have to sit in the peaceful temple to meditate with your abusive leader. You can do it in the comfort of your own home. And people are, if they're asking for money, if they're telling you that you're going to transcend to some other plane or world, or that you're going to survive the apocalypse or live forever or whatever the transcendent belief is,
Yeah.
you're in something dangerous. So sorry, back to your shaman.
Yeah.
I need to break there. Like this is a huge thing. It's not just your weird thing. It's like the whole world has this.
No, 110%. And I totally see that. Of course, with the internet, you're going to see a huge rise. And the problem is that people just don't know that those are cults. They
Right.
simply do not know. They don't realize that,
Nobody
I
joins a
see a
cult
lot of,
on purpose, except
yeah,
for like weird researchers.
right. You see like pyramid scheme, or like the coaching industry, like pyramid schemes and things like that. And like they don't realize that they're getting into this cult dynamic.
So when is the end of the world?
The end of the world was December 21st, 2012.
Oh, so it was a while ago. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, classic. Okay. Yeah, we all knew that was coming.
Yeah.
There's a movie made about it in 2011.
Yes,
called
I did go
2012.
see that.
Yeah.
Yep. I did see that movie. Yeah, it was huge back then. So that leader really took that and ran with it. But I actually married him. So like, yeah, like he ended up, but he was 37 years older than me. So I was like 19 when I met him, and I married him by the time I was 21. So he was.
What you do in your 20s, you're forgiven for. You can just wipe the slate clean. You got some good lessons.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot, but that was a crazy experience for sure. And it's like, you just don't even realize, what is even going on. It's like you're in a trance. It almost seems like in those moments.
Have you ever looked into narcissistic abuse or narcissistic behaviors and how that mechanism is used to control people.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a lot of parallels to cult leaders. Like a lot of them end up like we push those types of people to the top in those systems. And ultimately,
Absolutely.
like I feel like we're talking about like world building. Like these groups, the group dynamic like creates this supernatural, invisible world, and it frames the entire lived experience in this way that's like pure fantasy. But these narcissistic leaders, and they don't all have to be narcissists. I'm not qualified to diagnose someone with that. It's an actual thing. The psychology world has figured out. Maybe you can speak to that, but that they make you feel confused, and that they're the only one who can like guide you through the confusing world that they have themselves created for you. Does that ring a bell? You're the psychologist in the room.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what's going on. I think they call them communal narcissists.
Wow, interesting.
So I think abuse is like the root of all of it. And, you know, like at the end of the day, it's an abusive dynamic. And it reminds me so much of abusive relationships. I think they're pretty much, they're so similar. It's not like the same thing to me. The dynamic. I guess it depends on the cult leader too, because it depends, I guess, if they truly believe these things. Like, I feel like there's so many elements, and you're never going to know what's in a cult leader's mind in reality. Like, what psychologist has ever sat down with a cult leader and like gotten honest, you know, what was going on in your head? Like, do you really believe this, or is this, you know, a con?
I love that. Like, actually, I was in a relationship more recently with someone, and this is why I got into the narcissistic thing. Because by the end of it, I was like, oh, okay, they're trying to manipulate me. Sometimes it's working and sometimes it's not. Like, I can see through it, but then I kind of make agreements to go along with it or whatever, or I challenge it, but not all the way. Like, it's not setting my boundaries as clear as I should be.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, I realized like, oh, this person's like, I'm seeing the pattern of like their emotional cycle. And I felt like immense pity and empathy, which is like the classic thing that all narcissists are looking for, is someone to show them empathy, which then they use because they think, or they try to use it as a source of energy for themselves, the narcissistic supply, because they don't feel empathy. This is like the narcissist world, or it's a lack of, and I'm sure it's a gigantic spectrum that I don't understand all the way. But I was like, I have pity for them because of like what created this like monster behavior, and this like agonizing cycle that they're clearly going through, and they don't have a way to handle process their own emotions in a healthy way, that they go to the external to then like manipulate and try to control someone in this abusive way. And then they restart the patterns again. And I'm like, they had to have been conditioned that this was okay, or this was survival. And then I started launching into like those like researches, but I'm not working in that space. But I'm like, have you found anything like, does that ring a bell, or does that like resonate, or am I wrong? How does this work?
I personally, I mean, I see a lot of people talk about narcissism being learned. I think it's genetic. I lean towards evolution to explain that kind of behavior, because that makes sense to me. Like, why would a person have these charming, charismatic, great ability to control groups of people or individuals so naturally? Like, they don't have to, it doesn't seem they even have to really think about it. It's very natural from the, my experience with it. And we are social animals. Like, it is in our nature to form groups. It's simply natural. It's not something that, I don't believe that was a learned thing. I think that's what makes people susceptible to cults, is this human nature that we have to conform, to join groups, to belong. These leaders or narcissists, I feel like they're like literally manipulating human nature. And then I also think there are those who there are good things, right? There are good things that can come out of humans coming together and being social and forming groups and all those things. So it's like, I feel like you have both ends of the spectrum here.
Yeah.
For humans joining groups and things like that. But the narcissist or the sociopath end of the spectrum, like that's the dangerous end for people. But it seems to be a natural trait of those kinds of people, of the sociopaths, of the narcissists. They are like these natural born leaders who can, sway people, who can just charm people. And that to me is very much survival. Like that is a trait that you would have gotten your whole entire family all the way to this point in history, because you were able to lead groups. You were able to, or whatever it was. Or if you were a narcissist, your ancient ancestor was a narcissist, they had full control over the relationship. They were able to reproduce, and they would, or spread their seeds to many, many people. I think that's a trait that seems very, innate.
There's
many
value to survival. There's value to procreation, having access to more procreative partners.
But also, I would say though, like genetics are just one element of things, because then we have environment, and then we have genes that are not going to be expressed unless the right conditions in our environment require them to be expressed. So I think it's complicated. Like there's this, this is a really good case. So there was this, he was a neuroscientist, and he studied psychopaths. That was his interest. He
Go straight to the limits of society.
He got his doctorate, and he studied their brains. So he had a control group. So, all right, for those in the audience who don't know, like you have in an experiment, you have a control group that is not going to be manipulated, right? Like they're the ones who you're going to base the other groups off of, right? You're going to look at the control group. Yeah. So the control group, he found an image, and he was like, this isn't in the right group, because this is like a psychopath's brain, right? The physiology, he knows what that looks like. And they were like, that's your brain image. And so then it turned out, this doctor or this neuroscientist is a literal psychopath, but he didn't have any of those things expressed in his life, really, except for like he had a dark sense of humor, and he had the interest to study psychopaths, but he didn't have, he didn't have the other traits. And it was so fascinating.
Like takes one to know one kind of thing.
Right. But also like the question, right, why didn't those traits come out, So I feel like there's different factors that are going to bring those kinds of things out of people. So that's my take on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Deep dive. I like it. One thing that's been interesting, it's so many cult shows and podcasts focus on just one group. And I've started to really enjoy the ones that really branch out, and then just having been a speaker and showing my film, Witness Underground, at the Cult Awareness Conference, it was a place filled with there's hundreds of people there from at least 40 different cult groups. And from the whole spectrum of human society. Some new ones like the Jehovah's Witnesses and 2x2's Exclusive Brethren, which popped up in the 1800s in the States and England. And then ones that are more focused on sex or transcendent tantric experiences. Other small ones that are yoga based or meditation based. And just the whole spectrum, right? And also human rights people. But what was so cool was to kind of hang out with these people and get to know them, listen to their perspective, and realize that they have exactly the same mechanisms in place. They just have a different name for it. And so there's the BITE model as well. So the behavior control, information control, thought control, emotion control. If you have all four of those, this is Stephen Hassan's work he came from the Moonies. And just see that like, okay, we're all the same. But so what's actually going on here? And one of the things that I commented in my last live I did, which is like a decult decompression, which was like, well, what wasn't at decult? Because so many things were represented there. But there wasn't a good model for how to build a healthy community. There was a lot of people from mostly cultures who were like colonial European cultures, not entirely, of course, saying like, oh, we tried to build a community and then this person took control and abused everyone and then put in place laws and rules sent by God that make sure that you have to continue the abuse. And it went for generations and it's still going today. And no one can stop it because we have religious freedom laws that protect them, but they're actually violating human rights and they're able to get a lawyer because they have so much money pouring in and it's broken. And I suffered and my family suffered and they suffered. It was just like all these people, like everything's broken and we're suffering because cults are allowed to exist and no one's doing anything about it. But there was no one saying like, this is how you build good community. And I feel like we're talking about the dynamics of human behavior because that's what it all comes down to. Because ultimately a startup is structured like a cult. You have a charismatic leader at the top who gets to tell you what to do. I worked in startup. I love it. It's awesome. Not because I'm a former cult member, but because it's like a really engaging, fun, well-funded environment where you're building something new and exciting. But it has this idea like we're going to change the world with this product or this invention that we're going to create or this new software that will disrupt human society. Or like every major governmental project required a top-down structure. Like you can see the Great Wall of China from space. You can see the Hoover Dam, huge mega projects like the Egyptian pyramids. Who knows who built them? No one has an idea how that works yet.
Right.
But like there's 1,000 of those around the planet. So like at some point in history, it was valuable to organize humans into this top-down hierarchical structure with a singular goal and like really high stakes that you have to accomplish and finish the thing for a specific reason. And I feel like all parts of society have this. And even the general average employee situation is structured in a similar way. So, and we can fire people and then like, oh, like they broke the rules. So like, don't talk to them, you know, like ultimately these similar mechanisms are everywhere in society. Like, I don't like the way she baked at the bake sale. Get rid of them or something.
It's like the framework of society. And I think as a cult survivor, you go down that rabbit hole. Once you realize how universal these dynamics are, you can't unsee it. You do see it. You see it in your government or in governments in general. I think, you know, they're like a cult, but like on like the worst case scenario, maybe of a cult, like the big scale cult, like some of these countries or dictatorships, you know, authoritarianism, like that is eerily similar. It's, you know, and it's just expanded. It's just bigger than a cult, than like what we would, you know, even though cults are also very large, but, you know, when it's like a whole country and you have those kinds of rules in place, and then you have tell on your neighbor if they break the rules.
And pretty quickly it's Orwellian and you're in like a high authoritarian 1984 situation where, or even like the Hitler Jugend, the youth, where they out their own parents for having not agreeing with the leader, and then they get put into jail or whatever, or concentration camp.
Yeah.
And the kids are doing that to their own parents, like a surveillance culture, ultimately. High surveillance culture, high authoritarianism.
Yes. And then you have these schools, like Hitler, I believe he had schools for like, but it was brainwashing, right? It was like for kids trying to go to school and be brainwashed kind of thing. You do see that. I went to Fundamental Baptist School.
Oh yeah.
You know, where you're not learning anything, by the way. It's very easy. I was like,
it's like Handmaid's Tale style.
It's just like memorizing Bible verses.
It's not education, folks. I don't know if you picked up on that.
Yeah, they're teaching you like why evolution is wrong.
I have a funny anecdote from my life. An elder in my hall and our Jehovah's Witness church asked my dad if he could ask me to present something in front of the audience at the church.
Yeah.
But the thing was, my biology teacher, he was going on and on about evolution. that's his job, because that's literally a science, how scientific method works and what we were discovering for like 150 years. Older than the church I was in. Evolution has been a part of society for so many generations. And it is an unbelievable amount of evidence. This is just how you mix two different DNAs, you're going to get something new. You do that on repeat for millions of years, you get something new, adapted perfectly. But my response was like, oh, well, at church, we're studying the Revelation book, which is, if you ever read the book of Revelation in the Bible, it's like outrageous fantasy sci-fi, which is unintelligible things happening. It basically reads like a trip report from a heavy dose of mushrooms or DMT. It's insane what's happening in that book. But it's also like little bits and pieces pulled from like the cultural lore from like previous societies. Like that's a pre-Christian trip report based on like, or with mythology that comes from like other religions, other previous religions. And so we're studying this book, and so the elder's like, oh, so I went up to my biology teacher, and it was this massive red book with the Revelation, the grand climax at hand, that's filled with apocalyptic art and the end of the world dialogue, and like it's like one little verse by the Bible, and then it's like page of art and text from the Jehovah's Witness leadership, ghostwritten because they don't want to take any responsibility for themselves or anything they write, about what they think it means and how it applies to this decade and our end of the world moment that we're about to experience, because it's a doomsday cult as well. And I was like, this is the book that my biology teacher needs. And so I gave him this book, and he's like, I don't take literature. Like my job is to teach you how science works. That's it. Like I don't. But in the end, he reluctantly was like, all right, if you're not going to leave without, like, I want you to leave the classroom after class. So he took the book. And so I shared this experience, and the elder was like, that's great. You should tell everyone in the church about it. And so he asked my dad, and then he asked me after church session, and I was like, he's like, would you present that? And I was like, so, you want me to lie? And my dad and him just like were like, no, we don't want you to lie. But that was my experience of everyone ever having presented anything at church. It was like, it's just everyone being fake. It's like a fake, poorly written plot, like acting session, and bad public speaking event. That was so boring. And I was like, I'm not going to do it. Also, it's embarrassing now. Like, I thought that a fantasy sci-fi religious book about a trip report from prison from John, written in his 90s at the end of his life, was the right thing to give my biology teacher. Is so funny.
Yep. And that's what we literally say. And that your biology teacher. Like,
it's like, oh, I'm going to start the fire at the house with this tonight.
And you see that a lot actually. I feel like at university campuses, there's always like at least 10 different groups of preachers or whatever handing out different Bibles and things. And
it's like young, impressionable minds. Let's indoctrinate a few of them and send them out into the dorm rooms to get people hooked on the quad out on the lawn.
I think college campuses are huge breeding ground for cults. Actually, I think that's just very prevalent because you are so open and new to life, and during that time, and a bit.
Have you ever been like drawn in by another group since getting out of the doomsday marriage situation?
That's a good question actually, because no. I mean, I will say though, like after him though, he died, so I would have never gotten out of that group if he didn't pass away. So that when he died, I was like free, and it took me like 5 years to figure that out, right? To figure out that I had been in that situation. So like, I was never out of it at that point. So during those 5 years that I'm still a believer, I mean, so I didn't join any groups or anything, really. It was more like once people would find out I was married to a shaman, people would come to me for help, to learn things.
Did you have powers by proxy? You had social power, but did you have shamanic powers?
Yeah, and then over time, you actually ended up realizing you don't have. You're like, wait, why isn't this working? It's a weird, really crazy deconstruction going on. And my experience of it all was pretty crazy because I would go through those kinds of experiences where I'm like, wait a minute, like why? I mean, this doesn't work, or it's not working, or it
What were
just
people
kind of
coming to you to do? Give an example if you don't mind.
exorcisms, or like house cleansing. I remember a Native American woman called me, wanting me to come stay on her reservation, which she had like permission from the chief
to bring
come
in
to
an
the
outsider.
reservation because she was she said her child is being abducted by aliens. So
Like
because we
regularly,
did
or just one time?
yeah, and like we did hypnotherapy for alien abductees, and I Wheeling Network to the Mutual UFO Network and things like that. So we had a name on that level, like we did that. So she hit me up, and she offered me a bunch of money. I said, no. At the time, I was like, no way. I was like, I'm not. I think at that point, I was like retired. I was like, I'm not doing any of this stuff anymore.
I'm
like
done
I'm good
helping alien abductees. Like, just you should deal with that on your own.
Right. But
So
it was a whole process. So I didn't. But like, so I ended up getting into yoga, which wasn't even like that wasn't. I didn't get in some yoga cult or anything. I was just like, I did the practice like at home, but then you would go and I think I just stayed in that realm, for a long time, those kinds of things. So for me, it was relationships. It was narcissistic, abusive relationships. Those were the things that I was hopping through. Like, so, you see cult hopping, right? You see people get out, and when you're still like brainwashed, but you don't know it's still unconscious, and you're not aware that you're susceptible to those kinds of situations. So I didn't know that I was still susceptible, and it drove me crazy for years because time and time again I get in these relationships and it would just be the worst. And you're like, and then I'd be happy when I was alone, and I'm like, what is this? Why is it like this? And I finally figured it out. Finally I was like, whoa, I am still brainwashed. I'm still like accepting the same behaviors that was like from the cult. I'm accepting the same kinds of things. And it was almost like a norm to me, or it was a norm to me, and it really took a lot for me to snap out of that and realize
You're attracted
that, like,
to the familiar.
Yeah. And that, like, because you have those pathways in your brain already, like your neural pathways do not go away. They do not go away. They are there forever. So that's why, like, people with addiction, as soon as you do take the drug, guess what? That pathway on. And I think it's similar for cult survivors. As soon as you, like, that love bombing, that gaslighting on, all of a sudden I'm in my cult personality and being, like, submissive and, allowing this. And I didn't even know cult personality was a thing. I had no idea about that stuff.
The correlation you're drawing between alcohol or addiction of any kind and the cult world, the cult dynamics, is really interesting to me. I saw this expert of some kind. He seems like an expert. I actually don't know who it was. This is Instagram scroll. But it's this doctor saying that the actual drug use is the solution, not the problem. So there's an underlying problem that people that are addicted have. And using the chemical makes that thing go away and makes them get to baseline where they feel comfortable or they can numb out the problem. And so it's about attacking the core issue underneath that. It's not just eliminate the person from the drug. And I think it's true of cults. And the programming is very effective. And it's not just cults that do this. Religions do it. Governments try to do it to different levels of success. It's very apparent in the States right now. There's the word deconstruction or even like deconversion. I feel like once you get out of a group or an unhealthy situation or an unhealthy community, toxic or otherwise, whether it's you that are, or like, it's very complex usually. But if you get out of a thing, to totally break it down and to start from scratch. And so it's important and also not easy to do, because you said like the neural pathways are there, they're constructed. So you have to do something else to like create new habits and behaviors and dialogues, internal and otherwise, and relationships to yourself and with yourself. And one thing I kept hearing at Decult, which I thought was kind of a fascinating thing to have so many different people say the term, this expression, I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so I made this like deal about it on my channel the other day, last week, that like when I got out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, finally, after like being skeptical my entire life and like, you know, trying hard to be a part of it and also being a skeptic the whole time, kind of, I was like, okay, I think I'm unqualified to determine what is bathwater and what is baby. I need to, there's none of it's real. None of the groups understand what it is. Nobody knows what's real and what's real. Nobody knows if God is real. No one has interacted with God. Is there a God? What are scientists saying? What are the physicists at the edge of society, you know, or working on the edge of reality? What are they having to say? Like, I went straight material atheist just because I needed to like clean the house, basically. Not in a way that's like, I'm against Christianity. I was very much, but it wasn't for that. It was like, I'm unqualified. My brain is programmed to believe. My brain is programmed to follow. And I was resistant to it, but you can't be fully like resistant to programming if you're sitting in the indoctrination sessions. And so I think it's important to fully break things down to like, none of this is real. I don't know. And I'm going to like, if it's of interest or influencing your life, like do actual research. It's not easy. It's like a whole extra layer. And most people never do any of that their whole lives.
Oh my God. Yeah. I went through like the same thing. Because, you know, when I realized I was brainwashed, I went down that nihilism road where nothing matters. If everything's constructed, then does it matter? And like, how can I ever believe in anything ever again? I took on the philosophical perspective for a while to refrain from forming beliefs about things I cannot know. And that was actually something I feel like I did have to work through, because like today now I don't feel that way. It's like being okay with myself to form beliefs even if I don't know. But I went through that, you know, the whole phase of thinking, well, nothing matters, and if that's not true, then what? Like, how could I ever believe anything's true? You know, and like I went that extreme skepticism for a while.
Yeah, I think that's just part of the process. It's a healthy angle, because it does bring up that question immediately. Like, okay, so if everything I was ever taught isn't real, then nothing matters. Then all my basis for ethics or what the religion would call morality are totally not real. And so all the people that have done the worst things ever are fine. They got away with it. Like, that sucks. I've been the good guy this whole time, doing the right thing according to, you know, whatever framework. I didn't have to do that. I could have lied, cheated, stolen. Like, this is my Run the Jewels, lie, cheat, steal, kill, win reference. It's a song. And it would be fine. And actually, maybe that is the only way to get ahead, right? Like, my mind is going down those pathways. But at the same time, like, if something is inherently true or real, like let's say just I don't even want to say God, but like a lot of people hang on to the idea of God. Like, if he's real, he doesn't require it doesn't require you to believe in it or them. Like, it will, if they're real, like you're the least significant aspect of whether or not they're real.
Yeah.
So if they're real, it will be apparent to you later. So it's okay to live with the idea that God's not real. It has nothing to do with your salvation or your future. Whether or not you're an active believer or an active ritual doer by like going to church or praying. I feel like breaking things down to like have a healthy relationship with yourself is so important. And then try to figure out where is your identity? Like, what are you wrapping your identity into or around, or however you want to express that. But just like be. It's okay to just be without actually having the answers for a while.
See, that's an interesting thing, because it seems, I feel like people have this mistaken belief that like that morality is religion.
If you've read the Bible, you would never claim that the Bible is a source of morality.
Right.
It is a book that claims the most outrageous crimes were done by God. And it goes, It's like verse after verse, chapter after chapter, book after book of how sadistic and evil the ruler of the universe is and how you should be afraid. That's what the Bible is. So if you want to base your on morality on the Bible, get slaves, abuse women, and have mass genocide. Like that's the story on repeat.
Yeah, God sent some bears to kill some children for making fun of like a crippled man. I'm pretty sure.
A bald guy.
Is it a bald guy?
Making fun of a guy who had no hair or receding hairline.
Is that it? Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
God's like, let's rip those children to shred with a wild animal and make sure that everyone knows that it was my handiwork as God, because those kids were being mean.
As a child who heard that, who was told that story, I mean, that scared the shit out of me. I was like, what? Children, like bear, like that is a scary story. It is all based.
That's not the only one. Yeah, the entire, I grew up with the Witnesses created a book called My Book of Bible Stories, and it's just page after page of like fear mongering and the end of the world and like how kids are like should obey, otherwise they get murdered.
Yeah,
it's traumatizing. Yeah. Kids shouldn't have to have like existential crises at 6. Like it's good to wait until you're like 25 or 40 or something for that.
Right. It's always doomsday. I feel like doomsday is such a theme. Oh my goodness. It's like people don't look at Christianity as like a doomsday thing, but it literally is. That's like a main problem you're facing as a Christian.
One of the big questions that his own disciples brought to him on one of his few sermons, when is the end of the world and what are the signs? And you can read it. Jesus is like, this is what are signs, and these specific things are not signs. And so people have been talking about that. Perpetuating Christianity into our modern day is still just another vast doomsday group that has somehow been watered down through the Enlightenment, I think. Protestantism breaking up Catholicism's power over the Roman Empire and Europe in general.
Right.
Luckily, we had that happen, but it still sucks to have people wasting their potential on a Sunday every single week and then getting wrapped up into these subgroups as if they're more right than the other subgroup down the street. And wasting our time building buildings to the temples to what? And rooms to socialize, because we killed all of our wisdom keepers and shamans and people that were tied to the land and for 1,500 years underneath the Catholic rulership.
Yeah.
They hunted them down. There's a great new book, if you want to dive into that, anyone who's listening, by Brian Muraresku called The Immortality Key. He references one of over 40,000 hunted and murdered person who they have it documented. This is why we hunted them and why we put them on trial and why we burned them at the stake. And it was because they did this specific thing. And it's that's what happened to the West. Right. They murdered everyone who had any kind of foresight, wisdom, connection to the land. And that's why we have cults. That was my takeaway. because we took them out. Somehow the government took them out. They saw them as a threat to their control. So we have religion with a defanged like cannibalism like ritual where we pretend to drink the blood of our murdered leader, and we pretend to eat his body as like, you have to do this. But it's like that originally started out as like profound like ceremony where you would like connect to the divine yourself using psychedelics. And that's like the whole premise of this book. And it like predates Christianity by 1,000 years with the rituals around Dionysus and Eleusinians.
Really? Oh, okay.
Fascinating read that predates Christianity about like what was really going on before this whole thing started and got taken over by the government.
Right. Yeah, because I think Christianity took a lot from paganism. Actually, it's very. It's just like a lot of the stories and retold.
Well, they took out their leaders and then were like, you can keep doing the thing, but we're now in control of that. Like you see us as the person who brings that to you. You used to go to the wisdom keeper, this amazing woman who lived in the forest. Now she's gone, so we do that thing. But it's like, we don't put any psychedelics in there. You can't connect to God yourself. You have to go through us to talk to God.
There's some religions who do the DMT thing every Sunday. Or there's one religion I know for sure, but I can't remember what they're called. But they
too much DMT, folks.
Every Sunday, but they give it to like their children, their baby, like everyone in that group has been taking DMT every week for their whole life.
I just met some of these people actually, who they grew up having it since they were a kid, and their kids are now adults that are married in their 20s and 30s, and they are all like basically ayahuasca, yahe practitioners. Like they go around, they're like traveling shamans, but they were so the real deal. So there's my there's my curiosity right now as a like, how does this cult work? But also like, it doesn't feel like a cult. It feels like a cult in a profound way, but like, it feels also like that's real. The thing that they're tapping into, that plant experience, that goes back thousands of years. They have so much respect for the plant. It's not about them. It's about like you having a transformative experience and you connecting with like basically the avatar moment of like, try connecting your hair to that dragon and see, and then fly. You can do that as a human. And so I feel like groups that are keeping that alive and helping to spread that around are actually providing value.
Yeah, that's fascinating because the shaman of my group that I'm from, he was super against psychedelics. Anti-psychedelics. He said no to that, no drugs in general at all in that group. But I think he did not want us doing psychedelics. But like we would do like sleep deprivation or something.
Could get you there. You know? There's some indigenous groups that do dance that like get you there. Yeah. Breathing techniques that get you there.
Yeah. We would do like dancing. We would just dance for like hours, like different things like that. It's so fascinating. But yeah, I do agree. I think that having that, like psychedelics can be used either way. I feel like psychedelics themselves are very neutral.
Yeah.
And then you got
who's involved with it?
Yeah, what's his name? Charles Manson. Gave everyone, his followers were all taking acid, and then when they would take acid, he would tell them these stories of him being Jesus Christ, him dying on the cross. So while they're tripping, they're literally hallucinating, like he's leading them.
Yeah.
To brainwash them. So
it's really manipulative.
Psychedelics to manipulate their experience. So I feel like when it comes to psychedelics, you have to, who you're doing that with, I think that's a big thing, like your environment and like who you're doing it with, because no one should be influencing your trip. Like no one, having.
Yeah. I think a rule I like to have is I'm going to not pay anyone for this experience, because that immediately like skews the dynamic. Like if you're paying for that, it's funneling money to the top, and who wants that is going to, like, people that are attracted to that aspect of it are the wrong people to be involved while you're having a transcendent like experience. So get a good supply, but be with the right people in the right setting where there is no hierarchy. Like, you're equals.
Yes. Exactly.
And what's interesting about that scenario that I was in is that they had a fee, but it was very, very reasonable. And it was like, well, they had to fly there with the thing and like work basically for like 48 hours. And, you know, and it's a medical thing. They had a big speech about like how important it is that you declare any kind of issues you might have, allergies or like medical conditions, because it's like their reputation's on the line, and like this is serious, and they're, you know, actively breaking like multiple international laws to do this. So it's important to declare those things. And that like, and then after the ceremonies were over, they were very clear that like they don't need anyone to advertise any of this stuff. They're not in charge. You don't need them to communicate with the beyond, whatever that experience you might have had personally. That anyone who connects with that plant medicine is capable of learning directly from the plant itself and nature, and that like, but also like they're very like, we can help if you have questions, answer your questions, or if there's something confusing or scary, we can talk through it. But they were more like, it was almost like having a therapist on site to guide you wherever you were at during the experience. And then like they're like, don't put us on a pedestal. We need more people. The world needs more people to like do the role that we have. So please like come experience this more. And then if you are attracted to it and find value in it, or think that you can work with us to help provide these like scenarios for other people to like have this moment that you just had, like get into it. We're not keepers of this. We're not like in charge. You don't have to go through us. And it's like, oh, that's completely opposite of like every religion. It's like they're basically saying you have to go through us to get to a divine experience, or like most religions don't even like let you have a transcendent experience in the religion. You have to like die first to gain the benefits of having been a part of a church.
I actually had an anthropology professor who, day one of her class, I loved this woman. She was awesome. So day one of her class, and she looks at all of us and she says, do you guys know that you are brainwashed? Every one of you. She's like talking about society, like culture. She's an anthropologist. She studies culture. She lived in the Amazon for years. She worked for corporations, and she would travel and study cultures like for corporations. And it was so interesting because she brought up the shaman, and she was like, I love shamans. And she lived with like a tribe, right, in the Amazon forest. So they have their shaman and their tribe.
Different meaning to the shaman that you married.
Yes. And so she's talking about this, and she said to all of us, she's like, beware of the white shaman. Beware of the American white shaman. She's like, that is not real. Like she was she was preaching to us about it. She clearly had some knowledge here on that level. I'm sure and I know she knew all about cults and all about those things. It's what she studied all this stuff. So I thought that was a great piece of advice, for everyone. Like, yeah, beware of the white shaman, because
it's enough.
She just made it very, very clear. There's a distinct difference here.
There's this guy
between tribal.
There's a guy that I met at Decult who does a satirical music performance as a white shaman. He's not white. His name's Dave Budakian. I can't remember how to pronounce his exact name, but he has a project called Buddhananda, where he makes fun of the white shaman, pretends to be like the ultimate white shaman. It's so funny. Very worth checking out. He's just like starting the project, but it's so good.
That's hilarious. I will definitely look into that one because that's just a lot of what I had dealt with in my life.
Yeah,
You know,
fascinating that she makes such a distinction of that. And I think it comes back to like, well, why don't we have white shamans? What happened to them? Because every culture has
yeah.
some kind of like ritual. I'm not saying that I like advocate for all shamanism in the world. Like, I don't know. I have limited experience. I think anyone in the States or the West has limited experience with anything like that. And I think it's good to be cautious about getting involved. And the shamans, I like follow some people that are in that space on like social media, and they're like, if you knew what shamans were really capable of and what they do, you would be afraid for your life to be around a shaman. Like, they are not here; they're barely in this realm, kind of thing. Like, oh, okay, that's an interesting perspective. There's like a shaman in training who's been like 6 years working on her shamanic practice and abilities, saying that about the shamans they are interacting with. Like, okay, wow.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. That's what I was taught was like, you know, but it was a fear thing. Like for our group, this shaman, like, he was a con. I mean, a lot of what the episodes I've done on DisAllusioned Podcast has pretty much gone through the con. So audience, if you're curious about my story, go back to the first 4 episodes because we really lay a lot of things out and, you know, break down the different things that he was saying and his documents and things like that. I have all of his documents and stuff. So I've been just going through and breaking down everything on my podcast. And he used it as for fear, though. He made everyone afraid of him, that he could kill you in your dream, or that he could. There was actually a student, or I say there were students in our group, right? So there was a student who was an ex-student while I was married to him, and she was very against him. She started actually like her own business, and it was called like Freedom or something, and you know, referencing him, like being free of him, and he would make fun of her all the time. She got in a really bad car accident, and just a really bad car accident. She had just tons of damage done to her body, and he took credit for it.
Whoa.
He told us, he was like, I did that. That was me. So he like used fear, the fear of the shaman, the fear of, oh, you know, I could kill you. I could do anything. I can start a storm. I can, you know, see you wherever you're at. Like it was, the power of a god is what you're convinced of. So that sounds really similar. Like, you know, and you're going to be on that level eventually, right? Like, that's like what you're being taught.
Did you learn any of those skills?
No.
It was like a vampire situation. You're like the vampire helper who brings in the fresh blood. Do you ever watch, what's the comedy about vampires in New Zealand, actually? What We Do in the Shadows, I think it's called. It's so funny. Basically, like, there's these vampires who live thousands of years. Hundreds of years at least, but they need to eat. So like they get a helper who's like promising to give them immortality to become a vampire, but they won't. Like, they could eat them at any time and kill them, but they promise that they won't do that, and that eventually that they'll make them into their own vampire. But they don't want to do that. They're incentivized to like keep them bringing in the fresh bodies. It's a comedy, but it's like you'll be a shaman too one day. But first be afraid of me and let me control you. Like, wait, that's not the deal.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do have to, well, you know, like he did teach me a lot on that level, but like me to, you know, over time, looking back on those things, you know, you don't know. It's hard to know for sure, like, what's real and what's not in that situation, to be honest. It's like
at the time you believed it, so it's like you have a reinforced memory of a thing that you think was real, right?
Yeah.
And I had this,
it messes with me
with demons, because Jehovah's Witnesses, what I realized is that every Jehovah's Witness that I met who actually like seemed like a really fervent believer, like really deeply faithful, had some experience with something scary. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses don't have direct connection to God. You don't have experiences with God. You don't have experience with angels. but they do have experiences with demons, and that's like education that's reinforced that like the demons are always ever present, but angels are busy doing other stuff for God somewhere else. But there's demons around, so you have to like protect yourself from demons all the time.
Wow.
So with that kind of, reinforcement, some unexplainable things happened in my life that scared me. And what did I think it was? I thought it was demons. And I had it was like daily for a long time, for years. And I think some part of me, even, I haven't been a part of that world for 16 years at this point. And I haven't had a single experience with anything scary or demonic since that day. Like I was like, oh, that's not real. And then nothing scary ever happened again. But while I thought it might be real, it wasn't like, oh my God, demons are very real to me. I was just like, everyone's telling me that they're real, and I'm having unexplainable things happen that I thought were unexplainable. Looking back, it's like, okay, if I'm being really rational, what was that scary noise? Like, sounded like a finger's scratching across the wall of the bedroom, but maybe it was just like a branch on the tree that I know is touching the house near that wall that was like moving in the wind. So like, was it every time that thing? I definitely felt afraid, but it was my emotion, an indication that some supernatural force in the shape of like a really scary like humanoid spirit creature scratching on the walls when it could have easily just been a stick. So like when I look back on it, it's like, oh, I think none of that was real as a rational adult. But at the time, the reinforced memory and the reinforced emotion associated with fear tells me that it's real. And so some part of, I have these moments in my adult life where I'm like, I have that feeling and I'm like, when's the last time I felt this? Oh, yeah. When the weird demon creature was scratching on the walls, freaking me out. Never entered the bedroom, but like nearly, just enough to like toy with this person. It's like, well, why would they waste their time doing that? They're like a legit, like supernatural being with immortality. Why are they like fucking with some guy in the forest scratching on his wall?
Because you're a believer and they're testing you or whatever it is. My experience was like being in a group of people. I think the group, everyone wants to believe in everything that is happening. So anything, and I do believe in the power of suggestion. I truly do, especially knowing, I guess after going to school for psych, I was like, oh wow. Like people can literally manipulate your memories. And that's facts. Like we know psychologists have been studying that for a long time. And you know that that's something that can happen, has happened, does happen. Even in therapy that can happen where, therapists have suggested like, you were molested. And then it turned out person was without a doubt not molested by, whoever they said.
Yeah, I've heard about
you
this.
see that stuff.
Yeah. That's an extreme case, but that's the example I've also heard before, where people have like implanted memories that are like new. They never happened.
That never happened.
But then it plays into the narrative of like, but what if they were? And then it's like, well, how are we supposed to like unravel what's real and what's not if the person never had that experience? Now they do. Like that happens a lot with repressed memories that were real, that were like hidden away. So it's unfortunate that that's the example people use because people barely feel the freedom to speak about these things.
Yeah, no. And I think, this specific example was something that went to court and it was like, it was.
Yeah. There was evidence to the contrary.
Yeah. So it wasn't like based on hearsay. It was like they went through a judge and it turned out that, there's something weird going on. Well, I can give a way better example, which is the psychologist who found out or who first experimented on this. She wanted to see if she could do this. And she told him the memory. And eventually, by the end of the night, he was telling other people that memory
Oh, wow.
from his own memory, but he's added details and things like that. So that's kind of like the origin of when we realized that, that's something like the power of suggestion, and like your mind, the way you visualize and probably trust as well for that particular situation.
There's a few movies that play with this idea. One of them being The Island, if I recall. It's been like 20 some years since I saw that. Where they basically raise clones for the rich of their own bodies, and then they do organ harvesting. That's like where they get to go to the island, which is their version of like heaven or paradise for that culture. But they grow their bodies really fast, but they're given these like suggested memories to make them feel like they have an origin story, even though they were just born like a month ago in like a vat. And then there's some other futuristic dystopias where the children are like imprinted with like memories of a beach in the family, but it's like fuzzy. That's like videos playing above them or in an immersive environment or something.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder, like, so what kind of implanted memories have you had, or did your cult leader do this type of thing?
Yeah, he was a hypnotherapist, or he did hypnotherapy. Damn. Like, I get into all this with some of the ex-members that I've interviewed where, they do talk about their sessions, their hypnotherapy, and the way that he would suggest, like he would tell them everything instead of them the opposite, right? Like he would like lead them on their journey through their memories. So in that way, he was like encouraging these memories. He did that to me, but like for me, it didn't work. Like I knew that I didn't have those memories. Like I knew that. And even though I like went with what he was saying, to this day, I know that that's not, I don't have those kinds of memories in my mind.
An interesting piece of the cult experience is like most people that have never been a part of one or don't know that they were a part of one or some kind of, controlling environment, that like some people are a part of it and going along with it while disbelieving it. But they're like, it's like, it's so much effort. And it's like the risks are that I lose my community or my family if I speak out. So you're like, I'll just not say how ridiculous I think this thing is to save face in the moment because I just want to get pizza after with my family or whatever.
Is
and
that
like, how many
insane?
years do people go along with the thing? And like, how many active members in all these different groups are just going along with it because they're so intertwined with their greater community, or they have a fear, or like they get some benefit socially out of the thing?
The ex-members from my group who I have spoken with, it seems that they spoke of those moments as well, where they're like, yeah, I questioned this, but I believed in you, or like whatever, and we all did that. Every one of us, we ignored like our intuition. It's like you get a gut feeling, that this is wrong. You just know certain things are wrong. I did, and I know I knew certain things are wrong, but like I was always excusing it. I was his wife, so it was like, I couldn't go against him like in front of anyone. I could behind closed doors. Like I could question things, but I could not like question. I did one time and I got like in trouble, right? Where I like questioned him in front of everyone. Later he was like, you cannot do that. He's like, if you have a problem, talk to me in private. You don't ever do that again. And like, so you're not allowed, like and it's crazy to think you're not allowed to speak something like if you disagree. But that's totally how it went. There's a social pressure. Social pressure is great for silencing people, to be honest. It's something work.
What, from a psychological perspective, what other kinds of people do this kind of compartmentalization? Like they get to control the narrative and no one else can. And if you try to, you get punished. Does he fit some kind of like mold or some kind of like known person? I mean, it doesn't sound so far like you'd have to have an entire condition for that kind of behavior, but is there a behavior?
I mean, I don't know. I guess there's different kinds of behaviors that are like that, because then we know that like, what is that? Munchausen by proxy?
Say it again.
I think Munchausen by proxy, where it'll be like the guardian will be, Gypsy Rose, and the guardian will be
actually don't know.
convincing the child they're sick.
Oh,
control
yeah. No, I
everything.
just read about that. It might be from your channel.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
Actually, I think I saw it too on a different podcast.
Yeah, it was like
recently had come up
where you're like in a cult of one, where like your parent is trying to convince you that you have a medical condition, and you have to get all these surgeries and like work done from the doctor, and then the kids like brainwashed into thinking they have this problem that they don't actually have.
Yeah.
And then
that's crazy.
The headline that I read, because I didn't read the article, I was like, I've never heard any of this. What is this? And it was like, yeah, this became kind of like mainstream when this daughter had murdered her mom to get out of the situation. Like, yo.
That was Gypsy Rose.
Okay. Wow.
She,
What's wrong with
that's
these
a
people?
crazy story. Right. And it was like such an ethical debate because she was released from prison. And it was a debate like whether or not, because the boyfriend who murdered her, it was her boyfriend who murdered her mom, but the story is she manipulated him to murder her mom. So she was brainwashed by mom, and then it sounds like she took those things and convinced boyfriend to help her get rid of her mom. So it was it's an ongoing ethical debate, to be honest. On like what's the right thing here, like that is a very sticky situation, but it is a good example of grooming. It's like that is what's going on there, but they're also similar, and I think you see those behaviors everywhere. You see those behaviors, like this is not special to a cult,
Right? Exactly.
It's not special. It's like cults aren't any different than those other things. Like you can have family cults where just mom and dad are extremely controlling and maybe religious, or maybe they form their own belief system or something, or there's no religion. They're just simply controlling and abusive. But it's still going to be the same thing.
Yeah, the same types of control dynamics.
Right.
Manipulation.
Or like pedophiles or predators, like they groom children.
That movie with Tim Ballard that came out, that one drove me so crazy. Or it's about Tim Ballard he's a real human, a Mormon, trying to say that like Hollywood has pedophiles. And of course, we're seeing in the news that this is a real thing. There's human trafficking, and the people with money are the ones paying for that trafficking. And he's basically trying to say, like, as good Christians, we need to stop this. And so he was doing these crazy stunts, like getting a helicopter. He's like ex-military. So like hire a helicopter with all this donation money and like, descend on a rope into a place and like get the local police force to like help him bust like real like brothels and get kids out. And it's like, okay, it's really performative and extreme, but his whole base is religious people trying to say like, this doesn't happen here because we're good Christians. Meanwhile, what was happening simultaneously to that was an unprecedented court case in Pennsylvania where literally every U.S. state has a statute of limitations, which allows predators and pedophiles and rapists to never be able to be tried in court. The evidence gets thrown out of the room because the victim took too long to say anything about it. And it's the only law like that. Like, you can commit crimes and you can be tried for them anytime in the future if you're found out and there's evidence, but not with child molestation or rape. And it's like, well, clearly pedophiles designed this system. Why are we putting up with this? So they lifted that. A woman got in charge in Pennsylvania and with the help of a lot of different people, litigated to remove the statute of limitations. And they were able to get like 16 Jehovah's Witness active perpetrators who were never taken to court, although the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, every local congregation knew about it and never reported them. Meanwhile, they're attacking more and more kids because it's a safe haven for pedophilia. And this is known now around the world. Australia had their big royal commission. There's investigations in many, many countries, and they're finding problems in all of these places. And then Jehovah's Witnesses try to settle out of court, and there's a lot of hush money, but ultimately, like, there's a lot of cases that do get figured out where the victims get compensated, and it does make the religion look as they should as criminals, as a criminal organization. What was I going to say as a tangent? Oh, so like, yeah, the Tim Ballard movie, it's like the own people funding this is like, and thinking that it's not happening in your own church. That's a problem. It's like it's like when you're a kid and you're like,
Right.
look at my snapping finger, then you slap someone with the other hand, right? It's like a diversion. Don't look at the actor who's trying to self-aggrandize and like soak up all the money and funds to like tackle an issue in a way that's like 1% of the problem. 99% of the problem is like family members and religious groups are protecting the perpetrators, and there's laws being made to protect them too. So like we need to fix the broken system, and the source is usually religious groups. My rant. That movie drove me crazy.
Absolutely. I think like Jehovah's Witnesses are like on the top there with pedophilia, right?
They're massive. It's a massive, massive problem. And people think it's like way bigger than the Catholic Church issue.
All of these problems can be solved. That's what drives me crazy is like we have all these laws in place that have all these loopholes that allow for this shit to happen.
Exactly.
Don't even get me started on child marriage laws. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Why? What universe does that make sense? Like when you are 15, you don't know what you want. You are not ready to get married. Your brain's not developed at all. Like it's not. And then you have, with parents' permission, they can marry, a way older man, and that's okay because they're married.
It's unacceptable.
And what is that?
Yeah. And it's happening all over the world. It's not just, we don't have to pick on any one religion, but yeah, I don't understand why that would ever be acceptable in any culture in the modern day.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's like, what year is this? It allows trafficking to happen. I don't think freedom of religion like requires child marriage. I don't, like you can be free to have your beliefs, but my goodness.
I like about cults is that they go so far, so fast that they become talking points for like, how do we actually fix society? Because look at how bad it goes so quickly over here. So there's this like, they're like they're crossing all these boundaries that we as a greater society don't want people to be able to cross because it's dangerous for somebody, or someone totally gets, screwed over or has psychological issues because they were abused for how many, by this group forever as a child. And like, we recognize that like, these are problems. We made laws. Our ancestors made laws about these things, and we have laws in place, but like do something about it, enforce the law like we already have. But I think one of the big problems is allowing religions to have tax exempt status and own property. Like, no, absolutely should be. This is the enabling of the massive problem. Like they've proven again and again, not in just the States, but around the world, that if you give religious leaders tax exempt status, it draws in the wrong people. It incentivizes negative, bad behaviors, and they create their own legal structures that try to circumvent the actual law and litigation process. Like they have proven that they can't handle it. Like, let's get rid of their ability to like hold funds and be the liaison between regular humans, manipulating them to get access to the divine. Like that, get rid of it. It's a bad idea.
Right. And then also, if you're a religion, then guess what? All your employees are volunteers.
Oh yeah, free labor.
You don't have to pay them.
Yeah, as a Jehovah's Witness. And it's like, well, no, you're a volunteer. And it's like, I was coerced. If I don't, I get punished if I don't do it. So I would be going around giving out literature that is wildly homophobic. Like, look at this article. Like if the LGBT community doesn't turn around, they're going to be murdered by God with a lightning bolt. Like, hey, it's like, yeah, I know it says that and that's offensive. Like, I don't feel that way personally, but it's my job to tell you this because that's what the leaders want. I have to tell it. They want you to read this and be affected by it. and it's not my message. They're like, well, you're representing them pretty seriously. And it's like, yeah, I guess I have to work on like, where is my identity? Because I don't feel that way. What is the deal? Well, I'm not homophobic. Why am I a part of something that's homophobic? I don't want them to die. I'm friends with these people. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I feel like how much of that is going on with free labor behind the scenes. I just learned from, Was I in a Cult podcast by Tyler Measom and Liz something, I can't remember her name. They do a really polished program. And they had someone from Falun Gong who I just interacted with in where they do all their work in Santa Monica on the Palisades Park. I was like, oh, they have baozi. I love baozi. And I like, hey, if I hang out with them, I bet I can get free baozi with my Chinese friend. So we went and got like free baozi from this cult. I didn't realize they were a cult. They looked like a cult. So I was like, I know cult dynamics. Let's just get free food. And so I learned about Falun Gong. So they had this Falun Gong woman on for 2 episodes. And have you heard of it? It gets, oh, wow. Shen Yun, like dance performance.
Oh,
with
yes,
the Chinese
yes.
Dance.
Yeah.
It looks awesome. It looks like a really powerful, positive, like spin on like modern and like not modern. It's like ballet mixed with like Chinese ancestral, like something. That's a Falun Gong cult funded operation where everyone's Falun Gong member. All the money rises to Master Li, the leader, and all these girls like have to do it. They have to dance and perform and travel the world as part of their Falun Gong like free service to their leader. I had no idea that our marketing is over the top. I've seen it all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Just another example, folks.
Yeah, it's a typical tactic. It's something that cults always hide behind businesses or, whatever it is. Like you got 12 tribes who
delicious food.
I think it's a deli.
Yeah, delicious food. Open 24 hours.
Yeah, and it's like
everyone that works there is a cult member.
Yep, homegrown. Everyone there grew that food. Like it's good because it's like I'm sure it's great quality ingredients since it's like literally their followers were the ones who grew that food or whatever, or did everything, cooked it.
Their slave labor class.
Yeah, but do you think they get paid? I doubt. Maybe
No,
pennies on the dollar.
They're stuck in there.
Do.
I think they say they can leave any time, but it's like, yeah, but you have nothing. You've already given up everything you owned to the group. And when you leave, like what is, you're sort of left on your own. You're not helped out in any way. You have no landing on the outside.
Yeah.
I used to go there. Excellent environment. But what's funny is like, I was going to the Boulder, Colorado one. So it's like right after I got out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, I was going there and I was like, what the hell is this? This place is like so the literal front for a cult. Like it's filled with cult members and it's so obvious. And they're like basically wrote it on the wall. And they were like, we did all these drugs in the 60s and they've all this like psychedelic 60s style chalkboard art throughout this beautiful environment. And it's like, and then we realized actually that wasn't it. It was Jesus. And then we found a better way. And it's like, oh my God. So you guys started a cult?
Yeah.
That was your epiphany on acid? Okay.
That was it. Yeah, there was right. There was a huge religious movement at that point in time, with all the everyone's on psychedelic because it makes you it just opens your mind, right? A lot of people got into Christianity, and it seemed like there was a whole.
You didn't do enough, you guys. Take 2 tabs next time. They have a beautiful front, which is like healthy food and pleasant people getting back to the land with like a lived-in structure in multiple places all over the country and probably outside of the US as well. And so like there's so many people that I've met throughout my path that are like, you know what, I kind of want to get back to the land. What if? And then they like invent a cult basically from scratch. But they're like, but we'll just solve all the problems with like everyone, it'll be peace and love. And it's like, people have been trying to do this for like literally ever. But basically they like create a community house with like almost like an indigenous village, which is kind of a cool structure. Like I'm really attracted to a lot of these things, but like I've been living in community after living in a cult. And it's like, it's exhausting to try to do community. And this is another thing that White Shaman told me. Buddhananda, the satirical white shaman. And I really like his concept. He said like community's hard and cults are easy. And like it can very quickly turn from a healthy community into a cult by someone rising to the top, because it's usually a power vacuum. It's a horizontal structured community is what people usually try to design, with like a set of like principles, values, and like rules in place that keep things in order without needing a leadership. It's basically like some form of like healthy anarchy, right, where you don't need to have a security team or like a transcendent, like, the son of God leading you. So
it's ideal.
12 tribes is like they have sustained a community with healthy food, living off of the land. And it's like, it's kind of an extreme, almost like going back to like the Amish way of life in a sense, with like, but from like a more modern last century perspective. So it's like, okay, so what is wrong with it? And then if you read these stories about it, you'll find out pretty quickly. But I feel like it's not that they're evil, probably. Like I bet there's a lot of well-meaning people in there.
Oh, I'm
but
sure.
Groups go wrong. Groups, like all groups, all governments, all societies have problems. And I feel like this is the thing I'd like to explore more. And I think like what was so cool about decult is like, there's this vacuum of information. What does work would be like such an interesting panel. And I feel like society just needs that. Like what groups can we look to for an example? Because it sounds like we're a bunch of disconnected societies running around trying to reinvent something that like maybe the indigenous figured it out. What if we learned from that?
Everyone should have fullest extent autonomy, but that means only as long as it doesn't infringe on other people's autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Like there would be a line there, because I've thought about this a lot, because like you need morality. And I'm like, what? Like to me, the most moral option is to have autonomy, one for all and all for one. For example, you want to kill someone. Guess what? You can't, because that infringes on their autonomy to live. So like it's so basic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So simple. It's like, it's just as simply, you don't steal from people, or like you respect other people's freedom so that you can also have freedom.
Yeah.
And I feel like building a system based on autonomy and not control would be much better, because instead you're focused on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you're only focused on control. How do we control the narrative? How do we control the values? But really, it's like, why don't we just allow people to have their own? And where we draw the line is you don't infringe on another person's autonomy, period. And if everyone lived that way, it'd be fine.
Yeah, I feel like
if everyone respected each other.
There's always going to be some kind of exchange mechanism in a society. So like money is a really useful tool for that. But money doesn't need to be capitalist, where someone can like earn on top of the value of someone else's time or energy or output while doing little or nothing. Like that is like an interesting control structure. Like, okay, we optimize in the West, or in the United States at least, for the ability to extract wealth and power over others as like the norm. And it's like, get a good job. Well, you might not get a good job for a long time. So how much time are you spending in a really terrible situation where your time is being sucked up for the benefit of someone else, not you? Or like, what's the minimum I can pay someone to do that, even if they hate it, because they have to, because they're under the control of something greater than that dynamic between the boss and the employee. And so like the economic system is like built to subjugate and control. Could we build a system that was for autonomy, where we celebrate the individual's value while maintaining an exchange system? What does that look like? Yeah.
Right. I mean,
questions for the next episode.
It's hard and big. In like large societies, it's difficult, because in smaller societies, you can have specializations, right? Every single person has an important role in the community, and their role is absolutely necessary.
But wouldn't it be argued that we're even more specialized now than ever before? the greater the society, the larger it is, the more hyper specialized it has to be. Like I haven't planted any food for a really long time. Like I'm hyper specialized into like sitting in front of this camera to talk about this really weird part of human society.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like smaller groups, it's easy to do that because you can have one doctor, you can have
Right. Yeah.
one,
It's like the Wild West. You had Dr. Quinn and or in the South Park, you have like one place to get ice cream.
Yeah.
Like the South Park version of reality. There's only one.
Yeah. So I think when you got more people involved, it does get way more complex. Yeah. See, that is a tough one. It's one that I've thought about for a long time because, I sit on the fence of anarchy, but not the anarchy in the sense that what people like think anarchy is, but like maybe more like community anarchy, like what you were saying, like healthy anarchy.
Yeah,
where it's
we
like,
called it bananarchy, which is like a little bit softer sounding.
There you go.
We had this huge,
perfect banana.
I moved in with this, it was like this community of a couple hundred people in Boulder, Colorado. So like for 100,000 people, there's like 200 to 300 that were like interested in living in community. And then of those 200 or 300 people, like 100 of them lived in community in like 4 or 5 different houses. And that like was a growing thing over time. And so I lived in like the newest one at the time, like 14, 12 years ago. And they still exist, which is cool. Like it shows some level of like success. I felt like while I was living there right after getting out of the religion. So I was like, you guys realize you're making all the same decisions that make a community suck from a cult perspective. And there was like me and like 2 ex-Mormons there. So we were like constantly talking about like, oh, this is so exhausting. Like everyone here thinks that they're changing the world in an anarchist horizontal perspective, but like direct democracy is exhausting. It's so much easier to have a leadership or like a rule set, but like we're inventing it every week from scratch. And they're like creating like how to kick someone off the island rule book. And it's like, don't do shunning. We don't have to like attack their character. Can we like soften that rule? Because that's like doesn't seem very healthy. And they're like, what the hell do you guys know? You're not true anarchists. And it's like, okay, so now we're battling about who's correct. Like that's also super culty. Ultimately, they were all like really well-meaning people, and we were just trying to create like a new gated community that was like a little more open-minded or modern or something.
Oh, any kind of group, anything, you're going to have the potential for those kinds of problems just because of our human nature. It seems like that is what happens. You go in good intention, but then all of a sudden we're shunning, we're controlling more and more, and we don't really know what it looks like to just let people be free.
The biggest conversation we had like every week was like security. And it's like, oh, right. If the doors are open and unlocked because you're an open community, but the outside world isn't secure, then you're like basically inviting in people that could rob you, could hurt people, could threaten or make everyone uncomfortable. And like we're at home, so like we live here, so we don't want it to be that. And it's like, okay, so every society's gone through this transition where the first day one and like ongoing conversations about security, which is why we have security gates, we have security guards, and we have a military in a country. And then it's like, well, how do we have to specialize each kind of military person? And like hippies and like free love anarchists don't think about the military and aren't usually often supportive of violence. But they have to all of a sudden think about like, how do we deter those kinds of people? And then it's like, okay, so we're kind of designing society from scratch again. But like, if you leave the door, we already have all those systems outside. So like, what works is apparently suburbia. I don't know, which is like, that's like the expression of autonomy in a sense. But it's like no one really owns suburbia. The banks do. So it's very complicated. Just try to redesign the system because the same patterns will emerge. The same problems exist.
I don't think anyone has solved that problem. I think this has been a debate, a full philosophical debate for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Like no one's been able to solve it because there's always something. If you do go to other countries or indulge in other cultures, you do realize that how your programmed in a certain way being an American.
Like the greatest education comes from seeing the world from a different perspective and like understanding it if you can, to what extent you can.
Yeah.
Like just traveling. If you stay a while, like don't just go on vacation and go to a resort and like get free drinks or whatever, or a cruise. Like stay with the people, meet the local people. That education, it's life-changing. It's massive. It accelerates your experience and enhances your experience. Helps you understand how the human condition is similar everywhere, but you can still have these like other worldviews and perspectives on what's important. And it all becomes very apparent if you like dip into a few different cultures in the world. Highly recommend.
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't even matter which ones you go to. Just like try to engage and like make friends with and understand the people, humanize them.
Right.
Life advice.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you are in a cult, just move somewhere else, even if it's just the next town over. That's like my big like life advice for anyone. If you're stuck in a weird situation, just leave physically. That helps you accelerate the path to like unwinding the chaos.
Yeah, it gets you out of the bubble and like into a whole different, it changes your thought processes completely once you relocate.
Yeah.
I did want to ask though, so you mentioned earlier that you have a YouTube channel.
Yes. So I have a YouTube channel. I have changed the name recently to the name of my production company, so Banana Island Films. And in there are playlists. So I have my series, which is called XW Coming Out, which I've just started editing some archive interviews I never released. It has the original seasons on there. And that's about former Jehovah's Witnesses, mostly artists who've gotten out. So you get to show off their music, or in some early cases, it was like, my first edition was like, I was living in Vietnam at the time. So I was like with a Vietnamese ex-Jehovah's Witness, then a guy in Germany as an ex-witness, and an American guy. And then I branched into like, I actually like work with artists. So then that became the movie Witness Underground that we started off talking about. So witnessunderground.com for that. But yeah, I kind of want to trying to branch into like ecological like protectors, people that are working in ecology. So I'm like developing a whole new thing right now, which is fun. But I have another movie about a music scene in Vietnam that was like very international. So I'm actually going to be releasing that professionally soon.
Nice.
Yeah, a whole bunch of things. I did a lot of rock climbing short videos, set to music that my friends made. So like a lot of indie, weird, experimental stuff.
That's actually something I really enjoyed about your film Witness Underground, was the focus on being a creative artist, being a creative person in a high control environment like that, and the way that your gifts are suppressed.
Yeah, it was kind of. I just rewatched it again because I've been showing it here in New Zealand. That like we sort of like celebrate like, oh, this is the cool thing that was happening, and then this cool band was doing that thing, and then this pop-up event, and then that concert, and then it was like, and then the religion was taking notice, and they were like, oh, you can't do this, or like your bandmate can't be it, and it's like, okay, so the art creative process got the attention of everybody, and then it was like pushing on the limits of like what's possible in their community, and it was because of the religious oppression, essentially.
Like they're saying, like, why not paint pictures of Jehovah?
Right.
Why not paint pictures? Yeah, like that's
people
so
preaching.
Interesting because it suppresses your creative mind and your gifts. I think cults like inherently do that to people. They, your full potential is not known yet.
Yeah.
After leaving a cult.
Oh yeah. Also, I mean, people don't survive cults. A lot of people don't make it out, and the people that do also sometimes don't make it because they're still influenced by it, or they still believe some of it, or the pressure or the shunning's too hard. And so one thing that I think is like the hypothesis or the thesis of the Witness Underground project, and even the XW Coming Out series I am doing, is that using music and art can help you process the experience and move forward in a way that, first of all, you'll survive, but it might actually help like heal the trauma. And I'm not saying watching the film will do that, but it's just to show a bunch of artists who did it, and here we still have them wherever they're at. Everyone has their own journey, But incredible art gets made when you're processing some pretty heavy experiences, especially like a worldview shift like that.
Yes, absolutely. It's so funny you say that, because just a couple days ago I was talking, actually, my friend who's ex Jehovah's Witness, and shout out to him. He's my graphic designer. He did the icon image for this podcast,
Awesome.
DisAllusioned, and he did my lion for Intrinsic Agency, my logo.
Very cool. I'm all about like helping out any former cult member artists because I feel like they're next level.
Oh, you can find him. Mikey Made It.
Mikey Made It.
Is what he,
that sounds familiar. I might have seen his work before. That's cool. I'll check it out.
What I've done here, my projects were so actually quite impulsive, right? Or quite spontaneous. And like, I didn't know how much it would help me work through everything. Like, I did not know that this project was going to make me go through what I...
podcast, you mean?
Yeah, it's doing the podcast. Because I feel like I just, I went deeper into trying to really understand the dynamic and really processing things, like in the development of my podcast. I started this a year ago. I started the development of it, and in that year, I went through so many different feelings, emotions, just things I forgot, and like I had to process. Now it's been a decade since my cult experience, but it's like the feelings and the memories and all these things. And I feel like it's like I have this understanding now that I didn't have a year ago.
Yeah.
I feel like it just put me in a whole different place in my healing. And it's not just me. I see it in your film, the Witness Under. I see that. I see you create a project and the way that you used it. And I see it, in other podcasters who were cult survivors or trauma survivors using creative projects. And I've also, I don't know if you watched Baby Reindeer.
I don't know that one.
On Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. No, that one really got me, because he wrote, directed, and starred in a Netflix series reenacting his this most traumatic things that he went through. He had a stalker. And he was also raped by a writer in Hollywood because he was a writer. And so he took his trauma and he created this really, it is so good. It's extremely triggering, it's graphic. So good. And I was like, what is it with, trauma survivors and that need to do things like that, to do a project, create a project, or to tell your story out loud, to make it known, to do those things. I feel like there's something there,
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I'm glad you're pointing it out in this interesting way, because that's kind of a realization I came to from starting to do the interviews. And so my origin's a little different than that, but I kind of landed there wow, creatives who came from these heavy experiences, and it could be anything really, because the human experience of trauma is a chemical reaction, and we all have a maximum, and it could be depending on your worldview or values, getting served the wrong drink at the cafe could spike you to maximum, while someone else it took molestation or something, and have the body response. So who knows the limits, but ultimately having a creative expression about that thing or related to that thing, or just whatever you make after that thing happened. I find it fascinating. And then when you do an interview, then it's okay, so I can actually utilize the product of their art, not as a product, but as a medium for storytelling that allows them to tell their actual lived experience, or the values or the philosophies that they've earned from having gone through that, and also processed it by making this particular piece of art, or art in general, is fascinating. And it's so much more inspiring than I suffered story. I suffered and I want the audience to pity me. This sucks story, which is unfortunately it does suck, and you deserve pity. But at the same time, that's not as interesting of storytelling as it is to say cool, you hurt. You were definitely abused and manipulated, what did you do with that? Oh, you made a song, you wrote an album, and you went on tour about it. You made a movie about it. You wrote a book about it. Like, what did you learn from doing that process? And who did you meet because that thing opened a door, or you got on 100 podcasts, or you did a TEDx talk or something because you wrote a book about like pain and like how you overcame it. Like, that's way more interesting to me than someone's story. Not to say you shouldn't tell your story.
Right.
If you have a story and you haven't made art yet, that's fine. There's plenty of podcasts and shows you could get on to tell your story, and I highly recommend that. It's part of the healing process.
Yeah.
You don't have to make your own podcast and build your own audience. You can just become a guest, or everyone's looking for a guest.
But in the process of building the podcast, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah,
Nothing
I
anticipated. I didn't even know what I was walking into when I started.
How long have you been doing it now?
I just knew I had to do it. I just started, I started a year ago. The idea came to me like a year ago, right? And then I just went from there with building it and figuring out I'd never done this before. I didn't know anything about podcasting or any of this, honestly. And I learned, I taught myself all the stuff I needed to know. But you're just like, wow, the people I've met, not even just this project, but the people I've met along the way are just amazing people.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I feel like,
wow.
Yeah, I like the product. I like the project. I like the thing I'm doing. It makes me happy, and I'm enjoying becoming decent at interviewing or good at it. I think I'm decent at this point after making a couple films and doing this like couple hundred episodes. But the people that I met along the way, it's like I'm like honored to have the friends and connections that I have. Like, they're such interesting people to tap into. And the cool thing is, like, I'm like accessing a new class of humans, like super creative, driven, ambitious, travelers, people in different parts of society. Like, I would probably have never had a conversation with otherwise, but because they're a psychologist and they're an author and I'm a filmmaker and I'm doing a podcast, and I'm like, can I interview you on my show? And they're like, why not? Let's do it. Like, all of a sudden, like my like access to different interesting humans is like expanded like 100x.
Yeah. And that's something I guess I knew I would meet people, but I also didn't know, I don't know. I walked in pretty blindly, but you meet people. Yeah. And for me, it was like really realizing that that all these people can relate to you with no judgment whatsoever. I think for me, I hid my story for the last 10 years.
That's super normal, actually. I met so many people. In fact, I'm living in a space right now. I won't tell where it is or who it is, but they're very open about it right now. But like, they're like, oh, I haven't talked about that or mentioned it to anyone. Like, no one in my new community knows anything about that past. That was 8 years ago. And they're like, they have the exact same experience as me. Like, they grew up Jehovah's Witness and like got out and said nothing. And I was the same for me. When I got out, I didn't say a word to anyone about it for 8 years. And then I kept meeting people like you just were talking about, that like, I was like dating someone and we both were keeping it a secret and we never mentioned it. But then like a year later, someone died, and like, I don't know why, but I wanted to call you because like my mom died and I just needed to talk to somebody, and you're the person. She's part of some weird religion. I was like, weird. That's interesting. Which one? Is like the same one. Jehovah's Witness is like, no way. Like, me too. Like, what? We never talked about that. And then when I was living in Vietnam, I was living with this British woman in like a shared space, and she was in a motorcycle accident. So she was like living in like the living room because she couldn't go up the stairs for a couple weeks. So we were just like hanging out a lot more than we had been. And then she like dropped something, like some drama with her sister about her mom being an active Jehovah's Witness and like them growing up in it. And I was like, you what? I never told anyone anything, right? So I was like, this just keeps on happening. Like, these people are everywhere, and it instantly makes me like understand their story. Like, I feel like it's almost like meeting if you're a veteran in war, and you like meet another one, you're like, you get it. You've been through hell. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're from this same weird background, and like no one understands it, but now we can totally talk about it on all these nuanced levels. But I was like partying and taking like road trips with her and like our friend group. And it's like for months before we ever talked about that being a shared background. But then as soon as it was like, okay, I'm trying to escape from this. I'm trying not to talk about this at all, but these people keep showing up in my life. Maybe I should interview one of them, because I was having a great time talking to these people. And like, it felt great. It felt really good. And I was like, I'm impressed. I was already impressed by you as a human being. And now I'm more impressed that you like came from the same weird background as me, even though it's from a different country, but like same weird religious culture. That like you've made this whole other life on the other side of the planet like I did. Cool. We can be friends. We can be deeper friends.
Yeah.
That's how mine thing started.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like you don't even know who else is out there, because I didn't want, like, why me as a cult survivor? I have to assimilate into society.
Yeah.
And then why am I going to make myself more of an outcast?
Right.
Like, that's how my thinking was.
No, and you're
like,
right.
I'm not going to tell
that's how
people
it works.
that.
Yeah, because if you tell people, if you say like, if you're an outcast, former cult survivor, former cult member, now survivor, you tell people that, they will then otherize you into this weird box in their mind. Like they'll parade you around their friends if they want you in their friend group. Is like, look at this cult survivor, what a freak, check this out. And everyone will like have that framing of who you are. And it's like, you don't want your identity wrapped up in the religion. You don't want your identity wrapped up in, I used to be a part of that weird religion. You just want to be you. You just want to have autonomy as a singular Ari Sherwood and nothing else.
Exactly. It's like you don't, your identity is, was wrapped up in it for so long, and you do want to get away from that as well and figure out who you are in reality.
Weirdly,
and people absolutely do judge you for it.
Yeah. Weirdly, we're both like, we don't want anything to do with it. I'm going to make a podcast about it and then wrap my identity around this thing deeper than ever imaginable. But then it creates all these like really interesting, like at some point I was like, I don't want, it's difficult actually to live in life where I'm one person internally and I'm putting on an act to the rest of the world, or like have this compartmentalized circle here and this other social circle here, where I'm like have separate identities, where like in one of them is hidden and I can't tell anyone about it because I don't want the ramifications of that. At some point it's like, you know what? It's exhausting trying to cater to the reaction of an infinite amount of human beings. I had this weird experience. I didn't make that choice personally, but even if I did, it's like, you know, like I was a younger person with different experiences. So I got wrapped up in something. So did everybody in their 20s, like, or whatever. Or if your parents joined it, then it's totally not even on you. But I feel like, we successfully navigated cult mind control. Like, what the hell did you do?
Right, exactly. Like, I'm here, I'm out, I understand it. And like, what people don't understand is how anyone could join a cult.
Yeah, it's easy.
You know, at
They're
any
gonna make it
age,
real easy.
anytime.
Yeah. Also,
so there's nothing weird about it.
I feel like I got like such a master's degree in like things that people like are on their deathbed wondering about early, and I like cracked the code as a teenager or early 20 somethings that like, have you read the holy book everyone praises so much and like our society is deeply influenced by? It's disgusting. It's a terrible place to base your morality. It's a terrible creature to associate yourself with. If you actually read it, one of my favorite quotes is like, the road to atheism is paved with fully read Bibles. Like, oh my God, yeah. And so like people are wondering, and even as a witness, I was like, I mean, I don't know if this is the right thing, but at least I like understand this holy book better than like anyone I've ever met. I've read the whole thing and I think I get the gist. But then after, years of that sort of framing is like, well, I wouldn't want to associate with that. Like I would rather die forever and be non-existent than have to live in fear immortally underneath the tyranny of this genocidal psychopath. Like that decision was like, I think immortality underneath the psychopath is a trap. So like, I need to get out, and he allowed us to get out. Great. I can just die forever. That's a better situation than being a servant of the true God if that's the true God. That's a
Yeah,
pretty dramatic worldview
exactly.
shift. But
And it usually is. I feel like when you get out of any kind of high control environment, really, like you're going to go to you might go to the opposite extreme for a while. Like how I went to, wow, I can't have beliefs anymore.
mm-hmm.
That was my extreme. I went down that road of, nope, I'm not going to form beliefs about things that
I think it's
I
healthy.
shouldn't be, and like you go through
Yeah. I had some
those
friends
extremes.
who
Like,
left the Jehovah's Witnesses who were like deep nihilists, and like, but kind of not just nihilists personally, but like throwing nihilism in everyone's face all the time. Like, none of this fucking matters. It's like, well, that's a really downer attitude. Like, it matters to us what happened this weekend. Like, can we just like embrace that we decided to try to enjoy it? Like,
I mean, at least dabble, maybe think about existentialism,
Yeah.
where
absolutely.
you just create your own meaning and purpose in life.
This is exactly the thing I got to real quick because a friend from the movie, actually, because we were friends, actually, he's like, read this book. It was called The Atheist Way. And I'm not saying like it's a great book, but it was basically about that. Like, whatever is meaningful for you is the purpose to go after, is the general like cliff note, one sentence. Create your own meaning in this life. You don't need to outsource that or like find it in an external group or have someone else tell you what's important or tell you what's meaningful or valuable. You should do the hard work of figuring that out for you.
Absolutely. 110%. Like, you need to know what you believe in. Like, if you form your own beliefs, your own values from your own thinking, it is going to be much harder for other people to sway you.
Yes.
Yeah. Than if it's not solid like that, because that's solid. That's yours. But like, if it's not solid, it's built upon whatever anyone told you without your investigation or research or thinking or critical thinking. Like, that's not stable. It will change.
For me, it's team sports. If you're like, oh, my religion is Islam, and because of my team needs to win, and we're going to beat Christians, or if it's Christians versus Amish, or the Norse god people of Norway, it's like that's the same as like the Chiefs versus the whatever other football team, fill in the blank. Like the characters are changing all the time, the outfits are changing all the time, but the logo stays the same, and so you're just like, you're into a brand basically, and like your community's all cheering at the stadium for your brand to win. Like, that's what it is for me. I'm like, it's just tribalism expanded to like civilization level, and but it's still so simple and kind of basic at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then guess what? No one wins.
Yeah, it's boring.
That's the reality of it.
Everyone loses. Everyone's a loser at the end.
Yeah, because
you waste
you're not
your life
living,
on it.
Yeah, you're not living your life, and you're worried about things that you just don't need to worry about, Like, I feel like the morality almost gets distorted in that thinking, because what you think is morality is not. Like, what you, like being gay, like, that is not a moral issue as far as I am concerned. That's not morality.
What is
That's
a moral
nothing...
issue, actually? Like, that word even, I think, is like a manipulation of language. Like,
well,
maybe it's ethical.
Morality...
Maybe we should do ethics, not morals. Like, what is...
Ethics is good.
Just an idea. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong.
Right. I use them almost interchangeably in a way. Why morality and... like, I guess I'll have to actually look up and see what exactly is the difference.
I feel like the difference, and maybe I'm wrong about this, correct us in the comments, but morality has something to do with like a group imposed like worldview, and ethics is like maybe more based on the human like autonomous thing aspect you were talking about before. Like, it's not ethical to murder somebody. Unless the state says unless the state does it. be worth
now
diving
I'm
into.
I'm gonna have to dive into some language
Yeah.
definition. But yeah, the point is though, what people think is morality is not. Or like these are not issues here. They're not ethical issues. Like if someone's gay, like that's not an ethical issue as far as I'm concerned. I don't even know why we debate about that. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like certain things just simply aren't. I feel like they're being distorted, and it's like your perception is distorted at that point because, like,
I
being
feel
gay
like
is
what we just
natural.
saw in the U.S., because we just had the election, depending on when you're listening to this in the future, that like the issues that are brought up on the center stage are there to engage people in debate and
Mm-hmm.
that are there to divide people because they
Exactly.
know it will divide people. It's like purposefully brought up for those reasons because they want people to take a side to teams that we don't even participate in at all. And it's a game that like we're not even playing. And if you just don't, I feel like the news cycle, it's owned by like a handful of people and it's catered to cause very specific reactions in people and get them to take actions that they want you to take. If you just never watch the news, just like if you don't go to church, you won't get the bad news, it's the end of the world dialogue anymore, or that you need this like fictional character who was murdered by the state thousands of years ago to save you. That like if you just turn off the news cycle, you'll just like all the programming is off, that you'll just be alone with your thoughts for the first time. And I feel like maybe people are like uncomfortable there, and that's what meditation helps. But you need to get to know yourself. And if you're just like wrapped up in people pushing your buttons, and social media is like ramp this up 100 times. If you doom
so
scroll
bad right now.
Yeah. So just like you need to shut off the programming because ultimately somebody is trying to control the narrative. Someone's trying to get you to believe something. And it all comes down to cult dynamics, but played on like such a grand scale with so many humans chiming in. And it's just noise. Just get rid of the programming, get rid of the noise, and like think about what you want to think about. Read a book that you choose. Don't like, I'm a big advocate for like, don't read the politics. Don't read mainstream news ever. Like never, ever. If it's really important, it'll get to you. Just like the baby in the bathwater. If the baby's real, it'll show up. You don't have to
I'm
go.
the same way.
Don't go flood. Don't take the shower in the programming.
And the news, it's literally Plato's cave is what it is.
Oh, tell us. How?
Plato's cave is...
I know Plato's cave, but yeah, maybe the audience doesn't.
Yeah, like he got it. Or he understood, what is culture, what is society. He wrote... So basically, people are chained up in a cave and they're facing forward. They cannot turn around behind them, right? Their only perception is the wall in front of them. It's the cave wall, right? But they cannot get out of this cave. And they're born and raised there, right? Like they live and they don't know any different. There's puppeteers behind them. Behind the puppeteers is like fire, right? A light. And we have our shadow puppet being projected onto the wall in front of those who are chained there. And that's all they can see are these shadows of what, and those shadows they believe are reality. So we have the shadow, the puppet master behind you is holding up a tree, or like what a tree is shaped like. And then that is projected onto the wall and you see the shadow of a tree. And you think that is a tree. But you don't even know that there are puppeteers behind you. And you don't even know that there are those who are controlling the puppeteers. The puppeteers are like the middlemen. So you, according to Plato, if you get out of the cave, which is possible, see, the people who set this up are very much well aware of what is outside of that cave, but they're projecting onto the wall a watered down version of reality. So if you get out of the cave, Plato said you had a duty to go back into the cave and kind of help people to wake up. So anyways, there's a lot of interpretations of it, but I think my favorite interpretation is that the puppet masters are the media. Like, that is the news. That is social media. That the puppeteers right there who are holding that up, and that is what we are observing. But we don't see reality. You know, we're only seeing what we are being shown, what we're being taught and told. You know, but there are those who were controlling the narrative of the puppeteers, you know.
If puppeteers are just employees of the actual story creators, the framework creators who are going to benefit from whoever's taking in this new worldview, the watered down worldview.
Right. And I don't know if Plato thought it was necessarily a bad thing.
It's just like, this is human nature, that some people are like manipulated to have a limited worldview.
I think that, Plato said you had a duty to like try to get them out of the cave, but he didn't. He notoriously thought people were stupid, right? Like, he did not believe in humanity like that. He did not believe in democracy. He didn't believe people could vote, make those kinds of decisions. So I don't think Plato was necessarily like against it, but he also understood that it wasn't real.
He may have had a higher intelligence, given that we're still talking about him and referencing him thousands of years later. I imagine he did.
He made history. Oh, yes. He was a very, very intelligent person. You know, and he pushed...
Isn't one of the things about the cave analogy that when the people in the cave were told how reality works, they rejected that information? Like, they're like, no, that's my worldview is this. This is what's real on the shadow. Wasn't there like a moment? Oh.
I can't remember that.
Because like, what a crazy worldview shift if you were to get unchained and leave the cave and then see how everything was. Like, what would you do? And I feel like that's kind of, we were given this kind of gift of having that sort of experience to live with a new worldview, and some people never change their worldview or never have it disrupted, and they just believe that their version of reality is how everything works and that they're right. Most people, I think, believe that about wherever they think they are or how whatever their worldview is right now. They think that it's correct. But it takes a pretty big person to accept that their entire way of seeing the world might be false.
Yep. And I think Plato recognized that a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle going out of the cave. Because it shatters your whole perception of reality. But I mean, at the same time, that it's like the narrative. I mean, it's all fear mongering in the news and the media, and after my experience with fear mongering and doing all those, like, I just can't. I'm like, I have no desire to worry about, you know, what the media is pushing on everyone. It's all psychology. It's like your bad things, negative things, you will always remember better. They will always stand out to you more. And I feel like the news and the media does that on purpose. And it's probably more about even views and numbers.
Yeah.
You know, to push those kinds of narratives the way they do.
Yeah, the more views and attention that you can gain, the more influence that you have in society. Whether your ideas have merit or value or not.
Yeah. And journalism, journalism has been a good thing in the world in different ways by exposing people to other kinds of people and places. Like, you know, there was a time where it's us versus them, right? And we didn't have empathy for the Japanese, right? Or certain races or countries. And I think the media or like journalism.
Our grandparents' age imprisoned all Japanese Americans.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, that's not long ago. That's living memory. My grandparents are still alive. They were there for that.
Yeah. So when you are exposed to things, I think it does invoke this humanizing of other cultures and other race, other people.
It's wildly valuable.
It is valuable.
It's now to see like the rise of YouTube and podcasting, because ultimately, like, there's an entire generation, our generation, but I mean anyone in this moment living with us who have, like, we've democratized idea spreading, that anyone can now share their worldview in a professional way, and people can tune in from exactly how they want to on the couch with their television, or on the phone in their pocket, or as a audio only podcast stream, or however. And it's like, and it's infinite, like, or not infinite, but like it's not live, in that you can watch it again later, listen to it again later, and you can share it with others. And it's fascinating, because then you're like, you get to curate whatever information you're interested in with the voices and perspectives that you want. And so that's unprecedented. That is on a scale that was never thought of, last century, 20 years ago, that we couldn't do it. We had 3 channels, and they were all owned by like one or two people on like one political spectrum, or one other, very narrow narratives being spewed out.
Right.
It's a very special time. It's cool that we can hyper specialize in our outrageously gigantic super society to talk about cults and nuance and philosophy.
Right. I mean, the only way to combat the rise in cults is to do things like this, to put this in, to have more people out there combating it online and putting that information to create a balance between the narratives. I didn't know all of this stuff. Like, I didn't know so many of the things I know now, and that's why this stuff is really valuable on that level.
Yeah.
So we can, might open up people's eyes, or help them to realize or understand like how coercive control really works. Because like what you were saying with like, the media, politics, and just the whole thing. It's a lot, and it does divide people, and it makes people intolerant. So
yeah, it's been fascinating to watch, but I also feel like it's been the most exhausting cycle. Like I had to really limit myself. Like, don't engage, don't get fired up. Like, I don't want a psychopath or a below average intelligence leader running the United States empire. But like, I can't get emotionally wrapped up. That's just what they want. They want people to be fired up one way or the other. And it's like, the machine is like so ridiculous. Like, I have other stuff I care about in my life. I feel like if it's on the topic of politics, like local politics, high value. You can do something, you can be a part of it, you can affect change, you can have your voice heard. On the empire scale, it's just a ugly machine.
Yeah. And it's set up, it's set up in a way that makes it difficult to have your voice be heard. There's a lot of problems actually with the way that all works.
One thing about traveling has been interesting is like every single culture in the world has their own political spectrum, and some of them are two-party, but some of them are much greater than that. And the dividing lines between like conservative and progressive, or however, that's how US divides it, and we're very well aware, if you're in the US, about how it's divided and what issues each group stands for or against. But like the rest, like every other country has a completely separate way of doing that, with completely separate issues that they engage with the populace, or what the population brings up that are important for them, that the governments try to play to or cater to, or the leaders try to sway based upon. And that's fascinating, because that's like, what emerges from that is like, okay, so every place plays their own game and are manipulative in different ways. But what is ultimately at the core is fascinating, because people are just trying to create society in a way that's like either beneficial to their group or their life, or like to everyone's.
Right. Yeah.
Good education makes me really put US politics in perspective, because like nowhere else in the world divides along those lines. It's absurd.
Yeah, and I'm not here for the two-party system. I don't like it. I have a problem with it. I
There are
think it
better
is
systems.
too.
There are better systems
Yeah.
in other countries that work better. And the
Oh,
reason
I'm
why we
sure.
don't
I
have
could
them
imagine.
is because they don't want you to think it's possible.
Yeah. And I don't understand why we don't have a different way of doing things. I do not believe that America was meant to be a two-party system. I think it was built on the idea of having debates and disagreements and like compromises, and
Republicans and
was like
Democrats are like 5% different. They say wildly different things, but they do the same stuff basically. My favorite like meme about the United States political system is like a B-52 bomber unloading its bombs onto some unsuspecting village, and it's like one says, well, there's two pictures of the same exact thing, and one says Democrats and one says Republicans, but the Democratic one has a rainbow flag on the bomber. Yeah, that's about right.
And I don't know if it's because I'm a cult survivor that I like cannot be in a political party. I am
Belonging to something is a terrible idea once you've seen the dark side from the other side of the curtain.
I'm independent, and that way, guess what? I can just look at my options and look at things and do my own research and just make up my mind about what I would prefer, right?
You don't have to enter the echo chamber in reality by going to a convention or by joining a digital group version of a convention.
I don't have to conform to, my party, because I feel like we conform naturally, man. That's what humans do. And I see them do that, even though I feel like, even when it goes against their own interests, like they'll still conform. And, I think there's just too many problems, like for me, that come with joining a group, especially when it comes to those kinds of values and those kinds of, and I understand, like, if the group or if the political party like speaks to you and your values and like that's for you, like that's okay, like that's for you, but like, I don't know, I think I just have so many mixed values and I don't feel like I could just, this is it, this is the way, 1, 2, 3, or ABC, where that's it. Right. And then any other way, no, like, yeah, well, I guess I already went into that earlier. I like autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective. I really like that. I'm going to be thinking about is autonomy the key metric to base our societies on?
I think so, but I also think that, it's also a way, an ethical way to do it.
Yeah. I did an experiment. During the pandemic, we were stuck. I was a bunch of friends I'd made from like work and other stuff just before the pandemic. And I was living in LA for the first time. So we were like doing board game nights and hanging out, a lot of like intimate hangouts, just like chilling in the living room or something. And I got to talking about, so I was working on Witness Underground. I was editing at that time. And so no one had really seen it, but I was like, one idea got put in my head when I was like 21 into religion still by Richard Dawkins. I read God Delusion when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And so were all my friends who were all reading The New Atheists. And in there, he mentions the 10 Commandments being a, like, not that great of a rule set to base society on.
Mm-hmm.
But like people praise it. People mention it as if it's like so important to them. Half of the people that say anything about the 10 Commandments don't even know what the 10 are. So if you read them, and so Richard Dawkins is like, before you even go read them, whether you know them or not, like write what you think are 10 principles, values, rules, laws, however you want to frame it, that you think would make a society. You get 10, like go, like write them. You have 30 minutes. And so I did this as an experiment with everybody in this group. It was like 10 people or 15 people. So we all sat for like half an hour and we all wrote down what we thought would be good guiding rules for society. And then we read the 10 Commandments in the Bible, and it's like, you must not have another God besides me. I'm the only real God. I'm a jealous God. Don't like have you can't pray to other gods, and there's a couple good ones in there, like don't steal and don't murder. Like I feel like those are pretty like good principles, and that comes down to autonomy. Like that's my shit, that's my body, you can't have it. Yeah, there are a couple. I would say like 5 or 6 out of 10 are pretty good, and the other ones are just like, what is wrong with this? What's wrong? This is like something wrong psychologically with who wrote this.
Well, think, I mean, way back then, that was, that was Moses.
Yeah.
And he was seeing like the burning bush. And like in my mind, I'm like, and you know, their descriptions of his descriptions of what he was seeing. I'm like,
it's
you're
trip
eating
report.
from like ergot or something.
Exactly. Yeah. He was talking to a plant on fire.
Yeah.
And it was telling him how to change the society, and he could be the one to deliver that to his entire population. And yeah, I mean, I would say like if there was a description of God, like that's kind of like a good like psychedelic experience. And I would say like if there is an intelligence out there, like that's a way to access it. But it's also weird to be like, was Moses looking for worship, or was it like this being in the beyond? Anyway, he could have done better, is all I'm saying. And like a bunch of people in LA sitting in a living room on the floor wrote a lot better laws than like that God wrote, apparently. It's a valuable experiment. And I feel like autonomy, let's do the autonomy list. Like how could we form society? That's a homework in the comments, everyone who's watching the podcast.
Yeah, that was like my biggest takeaway after realizing I was brainwashed. I was like, wow, I know exactly what I believe in, actually. You know, but when you don't have any, you know, and I feel like that's something that you see around the world. Like, I went down this whole rabbit hole of, you know, looking into human rights and specifically for women around the world, because, you know, what I went through with my husband, who was the shaman, and how he controlled my life, you know, and then I would listen to these women from different cultures who would come up and just talk about, you know, realizing when they realized it was wrong for their parents to force them to get married at 13 years old, and how they ran away, and like the lengths a person will literally risk their life for autonomy. You realize that like there's this drive within you once you realize you've been oppressed to be free. And then I've seen these women like leave their countries, stop talking to their families, like or like not because they want to, but because their families aren't here for them leaving, and a lot of these women get killed by their families for leaving their arranged marriages and things like that, you know, or female genital mutilation, like things like that. When you see these women, like, you know, they go up on the TEDx stage, right? And they're sitting there being like, you know, once I realized it's life-changing.
Yeah.
You know, and I realized I have rights. And I didn't know that before, you know? And in my perspective, like, to me, that's just basic human, like, they are basic human rights, but they're like something that is a drive within humans too. Because once you realize you are oppressed, like, that is absolutely your instinct is to free yourself.
Yeah, bringing up the mutilation thing, it exists in certain cultures. Specifically, I've read about it being a really serious problem in like more extreme religious communities in the Muslim world. And I feel like I've listened to so many cult podcasts and former members of different religious groups, but Islam has like so many fragmented groups too. It's not just one religion. There's like very moderate, like it's like average society is a part of them. There's like super extreme, like the religious, like the world you came from, the evangelical, like far right in the United States. There is that version in a number of Muslim countries. countries with governments run by those religious groups with really extreme forms of hierarchy, male-dominated hierarchies where women are subjugated or subclass. I've met some women in the States who have, like, someone in their family had immigrated and they were able to get a green card and then get their sister over or something. And in one case, it was in the rock climbing community. There's this woman I met, and she's like, I can't go back. She can't go back because she's afraid she'll be killed by entering her own country because she left as a woman, or because there's an image of her on the internet where she wasn't wearing the traditional religious clothes. And people remember that and they will hunt her down and murder her. And it's like, how do we get this woman a green card? I don't want someone to have to suffer like that. But then it says that, like, oh, one woman got away. And so there's an entire nation, or half of them are women, who are living under that level of oppression all the time. And they're being, like, physically harmed or mentally harmed or sexually harmed on the regular. Like, how do we live in a society simultaneously where that is normalized behavior and everyone's kind of taking a blind eye, like, well, it's another religion, we can't really do anything about that. Freedom of religion allows this level of abuse. Like, I think our laws are built incorrectly if we accept that in this nation or any other,
Yeah. And you can get away with a lot of those things. I don't think female genital mutilation is legal at all. Like, I don't think that's something anywhere you can do. Not here in America. I don't think so. Or at least as far as my knowledge goes, because I feel like that's an underground thing surgery where doctors do the surgeries, like, underground.
And they were getting heat from it, they would just get a surgeon that would do it for them.
Yeah. Right.
Or like what the Jehovah's Witnesses say, like, oh, you can't accept certain medical care and you actually have to die, and they'll bring their hospital liaison committee, which is like 2 elders, will come to the hospital bed and make sure you don't take the medical care and die. And then they can use your parents or whoever, the surviving members of the family are, like, super, like, hooked now, because they're the only way they'll get to see that loved one who died is by continuing in their religion, because they're the only path to living forever. And everyone else that sees that family suffering are now reacting to that horrible, horrible loss. And so they're, like, also being further indoctrinated through that, like, terrible grief situation. And then the religion uses the people that are suffering the most at the heart of the family as, like, look at, like, they did the right thing. They went up to the edge and, like, their family member died. And I feel like you do these extreme things, it just, like, forces you deeper into the indoctrination, because you're missing that body part now. You suffered for God, or your grief is an example of your faith, like, horrible manipulative tactics to keep people in. The human trafficking thing, like, it's a very serious problem. And the United States is the richest country in the world, and they are, because of the money access, one of the places where it happens a lot. Most people pitch it as like, oh, it happens in a faraway country where there's lots of crime-ridden nations. It's like, no, there's a semi-truck outside right now moving human beings at the port that you might work at or whatever down the road in Long Beach or wherever else in the country. There's a container filled with human beings being moved, and someone's getting paid off as a bribe to make sure that no one says anything about it. Like, and I've seen this in the headlines once in a while, where it's like a semi-truck filled with 30 people, 18 of them dead, and it's like, yo, what's the story there? Who paid for that truck? Where were they going? Where did they come from?
Right.
Who's driving? And it's like that story just gets buried, or like no one says anything about it. Never makes the TV news. It's just like some like random article somewhere, or it's like mentioned briefly in like a newscast about politics. It's like human trafficking is like on the roads and no one's doing anything about it. What the hell? Who's in part of this thing? It's a machine that no one will talk about.
Right. And people think of it like as something that's like, oh, you're getting kidnapped at the mall and this and that. No, I don't. It's not even that.
No, it's religious groups and family members and like sadistic people who, it's gross.
It's like people getting groomed into it where they don't know that they're being trafficked. They just They don't see it. They don't know. And that's what people miss about those kinds of things. It's like, it's not even like the worry of, oh, people getting kidnapped and this and that. It's like the grooming and the way that these people who are trafficked don't know they're being trafficked. It'll be under the guise of a business or, there's a whole structure there going on.
Like, what do you think is the cause of it? Are people that are at the top enriching themselves with this financially? Are they enriching themselves sexually with this stuff? Are they getting free slave labor? Like, it's an ongoing problem, but like, it's designed to work this way. And it's like not being stopped by anybody and no one's talking about it? Or are we like living in a society of like below average intelligence humans that they're like, oh, that's a truck for fill in the blank brand? I mean, the dead body thing's tricky, but like, I don't know, like it's not my job to figure it out. And then they just dismiss it because it's like they can't think about like who's behind it or like what it's someone else's job to deal with. It should be everyone's job.
Yeah.
Once you find out there's a truck filled with dead bodies down the street.
I think it's ignorance, I think it is ignorance because people are painted a picture of what that looks like. Like I said, like it's, watch out when you're in the parking lot and kidnapped and made into it, or you're going to get trafficked, right? But really it's like this ignorance on how this really happens, because it could be something like, oh, I have a friend and we're really good friends and we hang out all the time. And then all of a sudden, over time you're getting groomed and it's like incremental, right? It could be like slowly. And then eventually, oh, you know what? We like, or maybe it's like a male friend and then you start dating and then they're like, oh, let's make some more money. Let's take you to the strip club. Or maybe you start, like it's just it can be very subtle, incremental, very manipulative, where like the person being trafficked, they don't even know that that's what's going on. They, and they think that person's their boyfriend or something, when really it's their pimp. And I've seen cases like that with women where this one woman, she got trafficked several times. She got out of it. She first got into it from like a friend, like a female friend of hers, who like basically spent all this money on her and then was like, oh, you owe me this money and you could pay me back if you did like a night at the strip club. And that's how they kind of got her in it. So she got out of that. And then she started dating a guy who did the same thing to her, except it was her boyfriend now. So when the police caught on to what was going on with her in that strip club, someone called the cops. And they like talked to her about it, and that she said that's when she realized that her boyfriend was her pimp, and she didn't even realize.
Wow.
You don't realize what is trafficking here. It's not just like explicit what you are programmed to think it is. It is like it can be something subtle and implicit and unconscious, and that just kind of happens to people. Or maybe you were born and raised into a family that's weird like that. And, it could be for money, it could be for power, it could be for weird perversion, or probably all of those things, honestly.
Like you're using the strip club example, which sounds to some people, I'm sure, as like an extreme thing. Like, who's going to start dancing in front of people and taking their clothes off for money? Like, that could be like an extreme like leap. But once you meet people who do that, and then it becomes normalized because there's a human angle to it, and they're like, oh yeah, I paid for my daughter's college, or like, this is a totally viable career, or like, try these drugs, they're like, make it really fun or something. There's this like human society behind it, like working at a restaurant or something. Like, oh, okay, this is the machine, and like I can benefit from this. Like today, I get a cash payout at the end of the night. Like, fuck it, let's try. Like that kind of thing can like pretty quickly be normalized and humanized. That maybe all those people that are involved in that machine are actually being manipulated by somebody, or maybe half of them are. But it's sort of like, hey, everyone's on a different path. If you're here tonight, like I can help you out or something. Like there's this human angle to all these things. It's not always like entrapment or like a cage in a basement of a psychopath.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I think people think, what they will think.
Yeah. Love bombing's legit. It works on everybody pretty much. Well, a lot of people anyway.
Yep. And I think cults love bomb too
Definitely.
at first.
Yeah. That's where I first learned of it. I was actively a participant in the love bombing experience for many people.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
But part of it's like natural curiosity, like, whoa, someone actually showed up to our weird group. I'm actually curious, like, why the hell are you here? Like, who are you? Check, like, this is me. This is our group. Hi, that wasn't just like follow the cult narrative. Like, treat this person nicely, in a fake way. It's like, well, it's so rare to meet someone else. I'm going to like love bomb because I have to. It's like a desperate move.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works very well.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We should solve the world's problems again sometime.
Yeah. It's getting pretty late too. And I mean, is there anything we'll definitely put did you say your YouTube channel?
Yeah.
You should put your YouTube channel.
I'll give you the links for it, but it's Banana Island Films.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So bananaislandfilms.com, and also on YouTube, you can search for it. And the website for Witness Underground is witnessunderground.com. And yeah, that's probably enough links said out loud. We'll put it in the description. But yeah, watch the film.
Yep,
reach out to me anytime. If you have a podcast, hit me up. I love doing this.
Yeah, Witness Underground was really good too. I definitely recommend it. Definitely captured a lot exactly how that process goes of deconstructing and figure things out and shunning. Oh wow, yeah, it was definitely a great one. So,
Thank you.
But I really appreciate you coming on and being here. I think this was a lot of fun. And
yeah, I loved it, Ari. Thank you for having me.
And we'll definitely keep in touch for sure. So
you'll have to have you on my show sometime.
Oh yeah, I'm always down for that. Dude, cool. I love recording actually.
Type 2.25 hours.
Yeah, it's fun. So, but yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, everyone in the audience, definitely check out Scott's documentary, Witness Underground, on Amazon Prime and was it Tubi?
Apple and YouTube movies as well. But all the links are on the website. But there's actually like 14 licenses already. So if you go on the website, it's like anywhere on the planet, you can see a map of where you can watch it. And there's some free ones, there's some rentable ones. All of them support the film in some way. So spread the news. That's the most important thing. And if you're hearing this, leave a review on Rotten Tomatoes. In any case, like that really helps the film get on lists and get compared to other films. Yeah. So thanks again, and thanks to the audience for checking out the movie.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for watching DisAllusioned Podcast, and we will see you next time.